say thank you for turning up and turning out here. Thank you ever so much for coming. We will start with the national anthem. We will start with the national anthem. Welcome again. I welcome you all again. And to open with remarks, we welcome Dr. Ashburn Pinnock, Principal of the Mico University College, the lead for our college at this time. Dr. Pinnock?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Dunkley, and all protocols observed, all our distinguished participants, guests, panelists, our hosts from ITA, and all on YouTube. Good morning to this welcome to this very important conference. It is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome you to the Mico University College, albeit in our virtual space, and we look forward someday soon to invite you on our beautiful campus. This significant conference, hosted by the Mico through its research arm, the Institute of Technological and Educational Research, ITA, will, I'm sure, bring to the fore the most current research and sharing of ideas about our Caribbean culture, experience, and accomplishment. This important topic of Caribbean culture, arts, aesthetics, and education is explored and being explored and presented at a very critical time as we seek to answer some very old age and pertinent questions about our identity, our relevance, and the role and value of our education system. We will examine the issue of culture and how it can be utilized in a learning environment to instill confidence in our students. For example, what are the current trends and thoughts on identity, self-esteem, self-confidence in education? Are we in the Caribbean embracing those views? And if not, why not? Professor Arthur F. Land, author of The History of Art Education, suggested that arts enable human beings to realize their spirit, their destiny in the actions and products of their imagination. We in the Caribbean, predominantly descendants of ex-slaves, are able to find ourselves in expression and in our culture. We rely heavily on talent and, of course, the exceptional find. But I will welcome the day when we move towards conscious investment and the deliberate development and nurturing of culture and talents. You see, the Usain Bolts and others that we cherish so much are exceptional, but we can produce many more of those, and also in the arts if we make a deliberate attempt to. We believe that our young people must be given the opportunity to embrace and discover our global successes and use them in the foundation of our being. This conference will also look at how the informal models of culture, art, education, and production, teaching, training, philosophy, and apprenticeship has been integrated in the formal culture and art program in the Caribbean and indeed in our Jamaican schools. As we contemplate the direction that we must now look, we know that the world is changing and our students must acquire an education that meets contemporary needs. I suggest that art, culture, and aesthetics form an integral part of anchoring our children in their smartiness, as the late Professor Rex Tetterford would explain. Over the next 2 days, we will answer questions such as, how do our people see themselves in this new normal dispensation? How does our culture manifest in our young people in particular? And what are the lessons to be learned as we move forward as a region? How do we use education in those three areas to increase learner engagement and to use our learners to grow in assertiveness, thinking positively and profoundly about themselves and others? We know that the art and culture bring people together, and culture allows us to appreciate our own diversity. In this new normal, this unique approach will increase creativity, which enhances problem solving and making connections. We have heard numerous times about thinking outside the box. Creativity is the foundation of that approach to work, to research, and the development. This is also an essential skill in a rapidly shifting world. There are two important concepts that art and culture aesthetics can be applied. There are the strengthening of critical rational aptitude, which can be applied to other academic disciplines. Thus, we embrace, for example, here at Mico, the STEAM concept over the STEM concept, as we know the critical role the arts must play in our development. The arts also encourages team building and collaborative work, and this is a very important attribute, and it is ranked in the top 10 most valuable skills needed for the 21st century. Working successfully in teams is the foundation of organizational growth and development. We heard just now a live expression of that, where collegiality and all the persons in this chat who know each other or greeting each other in such lively call. There seems to be a good network going here. So I look forward to sharing with all participants. You will no doubt place us on a path to identify and utilize some of the skills and resources that can assist and lead our students and teachers and also policymakers towards the transformation of our education system. There's no doubt in my mind that the range of subjects to be addressed will benefit us all, and I look forward to the document that will share these recommendations to our policymakers. The Mico University College is celebrating its 185-year anniversary this year. We have been at the forefront of each juncture of a national building, and we intend to ensure that our graduates are fully equipped to use all the tools in the toolkit to ensure that our people, our children, are given the type of education and opportunities that will enable them to thrive in this new world. So once again, let me thank the ITA team, led by our own alumni, Professor Clinton Hutton, for what I am sure will be a thought-provoking and robust conference. Thank you all for participating. And as you begin your deliberations, we say here at the Mico, let's all do it with our might. Thank you and welcome once again. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you ever so much, Dr. Pinnock, for opening our Conference of Caribbean Arts, Aesthetics and Education. There is no doubt that critical thinking, smartiness, identity, creativity, our ability to create something new, to create something out of nothing, all lead us back to the arts. And for that, we are products. We stand on the shoulders of others who have gone before us. And we have to say thank you and pay homage to them. As we go into this conference, we look at where we are, where we're going. And COVID has changed it, you know. COVID has changed the landscape. But as artists, and as persons who understand that identity and legacy and artistic nature, being artistic and being creative go hand in hand with critical thinking, with innovativeness. We have to have spaces like these for the discussions to be held, lest we forget. Michelangelo said, a man doesn't paint with his brains, you know. He doesn't paint with his hands. He paints with his brains. And we say welcome again to this conference. We are scheduled to have greetings from the minister, but she is running a little late today. And so we will continue. We will go forward. We will go forward and we will call upon our own Professor Hutton, who will be sharing with us in our keynote address. Professor Hutton, of course, is no stranger. He is no stranger to the persons in this room, and he is no stranger to the persons who are listening to us or are participating with us in this session. He is no stranger because he comes to us as an alumni of the Mico. He's currently our own director of Institute of Technological and Educational Research. And he comes with us. I don't think there's an area of within the art space that Professor Hutton has not been involved with and been immersed in. I will say, Professor Hutton, we are privileged to hear you speak today, to hear you give our keynote address today. I say thank you, sir. Well, thank you for your service. Thank you for your continued push and support to push the arts as I hand over to you for our keynote address on culture, arts, perspectives.
Good morning, Dr. Dunkley, colleagues and friends, the President, Dr. Pinnock, all protocol observed. I am from Jericho in Hanover. And whenever there is a wake, and you have wake songs coming back from 300 years ago, they usually begin those songs by saying, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And I will begin my presentation that way. There is a fundamental truth that Jamaica, the Caribbean, is a global cultural artistic power. But that power is not reflected in our classrooms, in our pedagogy. Bob Marley is an international master. Oh, for Leroy Clark, the master from Trinidad and Tobago. So too, Lee Scratch Perry, Headley Jones, Beryl McBurney, Louise Bennett Coverley, Basco Holder, Clement Dodd, George Bailey, Peter Minshall, Wilfredo Lamb, Manuel Mendive, David Rudder, Kamal Brathwaite, Rex Nettleford, and many more. The roll call is long. The pantheon is long. But tell me where the man with the hammer gone. Tell me where he gone. What should pan, the panyard, the Orisha Palais mean for our classroom, our pedagogy? And what should son and rumba and kaiso and mambo and ska and reggae mean for our classroom? What should the composition styles of Jimmy Cliff, Paris Prado, Stitchy, Toots, Joseph Hill, Tosh, Kitsch, etc. mean for our classroom, for our pedagogy? My biggest concern is that we do not sufficiently understand the cultural, creative, artistic, aesthetic, and imaginative cultural ethos and what these meant for and mean for our existential viability. What is the meaning and the worth of the creative, cultural, artistic, aesthetic, and imaginative complex? What do these mean, should mean to us in the 21st century? To fully understand this, we need to understand the meaning of this for our ancestors, how they used the culture they reweaved to cope with their enslavement and colonial subjection and to challenge it. For over 300 years of enslavement, over 100 years of post-slave colonialism, our forebears faced a sustained system of inhumanity, never before visited upon any people. Over 300 years of working without pay. 300 years under an architecture of maintenance in which human beings were forced to eat human excrement as punishment. Like Port Royal, so-called, from Egypt in Westmoreland, who for running away was punished. And his older Thomas Thistlewood wrote in his diary about what he ordered done to him. And I quote, gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, and made Hector shit in his mouth. Immediately put in a gag whilst his mouth was full and made him wear it 4 to 5 hours. Or take the case of the eyewitness on a slave ship who wrote that the captain, quote, to strike fair in the rest, killed a slave and dividing heart, liver, and entrails into 300 pieces, made each of the slaves eat one, threatening those who refused with the same torture. And he went on to say, such incidents were not rare. Or take the case of Governor Pinfold in Barbados, 1764, in the manner of a butcher and a high priest, directed that the convicted enslaved man to be, quote, chained to a stake to be fixed for that purpose. That his privy members be cut off and burned before his face. And that afterwards he be burned alive. The whole carcass be reduced to ashes, and those ashes dispersed in the air, that no part of such a villain may remain. And that the whole execution may be performed with such solemnity that it may strike the spectators with the greatest awe and terror. These cases of desecration were meant to precipitate something far greater than physical pain and torture. Its purpose was to facilitate the making of the image, role, purpose, and identity that whiteness designed for blackness to be. One planter slaveholder in Martinique, spelt it out. Policy and safety require that we crush the race of blacks by a contempt so great that whoever descends from it, even to the 6th generation, shall be covered with an indelible stain. In other words, how do we reorganize the identity, the interiority of people who were enslaved to self-perpetuate their enslavement? Another planter stated in the same manner that the safety of the whites demands that we keep the Negroes in the most profound ignorance. I have reached the stage of believing firmly that one must treat Negroes as one treats beasts. The slaveholders knew that there are ways of controlling people, ways that supersede physical pain, but ways only possible if the interiority of the enslaved is also desecrated. They knew then, and it is true still today, that what is in your head is more powerful than one's physicality. How did the enslaved cope with their enslavement? How did they construct these? How did they have their being? This was done by creating a culture, imagination, creativity, and through the arts. So that Port Royal, who was forced to eat human excrement in the day, could become a king or a god or an ancestor in secret rituals by night, by being possessed by their ancestor or ancestral god. Possession rituals were enacted at nights by enslaved Africans to repossess, re-own themselves from slaveholders by enacting rituals that allowed them to be possessed by ancestral spirits and ancestral God, so that Port Royal could be forced to eat human excrement in the day, but during the night could become God of the crossroads, like Eshu or Legba, cutting and clearing the path to certainty, to reason, to epistemology. Art is what brings possession. Possession is called Mayal in Jamaica. And in fact, all African spiritualities in Jamaica were designated the term collectively as Mayal. Mayal, as they were practiced then and they are practiced now in Voodoo, in Santeria or Lukumi, in Orisha, in Spiritual Baptist, in Revival 60 and 61, in Comfort. These acts to reach what they called possession or Mayal were artistic endeavors. They involved dance, music, singing, oratory, poetry, ritual drawings and paintings. They involve all of these things collectively. And the purpose of this was to get to that place where they can be possessed by ancestral spirits, who then they replace. When a person is possessed in this belief system, then they become the spirit who possessed that person. And therefore, one of the deeper meanings of art, of creativity, its birthplace begun in rituals to free people from the vestiges and indignities of enslavement by being possessed by their ancestors and ancestral spirits. And possession is described in all of these cultures, whether in Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Brazil, Cuba. Possession is described as a dance in the head or mountain. Dance is therefore the premier, although it is used collective with all the other forms during the same time. Dance is seen as the number one artistic expression because it is the way in which the spirit moves in the head. Good. So the arts and the cultural ethos, possession rituals, freedom, African Caribbean spirituality sprang from these sources. And let us look at freedom. The mother of all freedom in the Caribbean is what I call repatriational freedom. The most important rituals of enslaved Africans in the Caribbean was funeral rituals. Funeral rituals were enacted to be able, if carried out properly, to send the spirit of the deceased, which we call Dopi in Jamaica, Jumbi in Trinidad, Ori in Cuba, Banage in Haiti, to send the spirit back home to his ancestral homeland, required the proper funeral rituals to take place. And the songs, and I have found a few of them, the songs that were done at these rituals were songs about going back to Africa. It is from these songs that sprang after independence in Jamaica to all a set of songs about going back to Africa. Rastaman Chant by the Whalers, Sata Masagana by the Abyssinians, Got to Go Back Home by Babandi. These are a few of the many songs that arrived, that came out of this tradition from our forebears. So that there is always a deeper meaning to the arts. Deeper meaning. The arts, creativity, these were the ways in which our forebears cope with their enslavement in order to resist it. These were the ways, at least some of them, in which they used the arts as therapy. Possession was the foremost form of therapy. So if we listen carefully, deeply, and see with eyes that are not fettered by ways we have been socialized to see the world, we can begin to ask simple, profound questions of our observation. When Jamaicans say, "My spirit not take that person," who is the spirit that the person is talking? And what does this mean for the philosophy of being and existence? Our forebears knew all of this. They lived by that. When a person in a bar in Jamaica tip his glass or his bottle of alcohol before he takes a drink, what does this mean for the philosophy of being and existence? And this was being practiced by our forebears. Sometimes we do it today, probably most of us, without even knowing what we do, but it's habit. It has become part of our existence. But what are the deeper meanings for identity, for agency of these practices? Why did the Asian Revolution commence with 2 feasts in 1791? And why did the Morant Bay War, led by Paul Bogle in 1865, commenced with a tea meeting in Stonygut the night before the war? These are important things, questions to ask, because there are deeper meanings in these. Why did Paul Bogle carry out the same kind of oath-taking sermons as Taki carried out in 1760 in order to commence that uprising, that anti-slavery insurrection? And what does this mean? What did it mean then, and what does it mean now for the philosophy of being, freedom, existence, and agency? In the creative endeavor, we have a saying, "Play a fool for catch wise." This is a form of artistic expression. This is a mode of artistic expression, a mode of styling. Play a fool, pretend to be stupid to trap those who argued that black people are stupid and they are the wise ones. And what is the meaning of this? When you have to play a fool to catch wise, you have to perform in such a way before white people that it is believable. Then we have a saying, "What spoil turn style." What does this mean? It's not something we invented in the 20th century. It came before that on the estate. What does that mean for artistic creation, for styling? Then we have another saying, "When trouble take man, picnic shot fit him." This is a classical case of what is called extempo in Trinidad, making up things right there on the spot to get out of trouble. When trouble take man, picnic shot. The shirt of a child fits him. Think about that. Then in Trinidad, we have a term called fancy. So you have Indian mass, but there is the concept of fancy Indians. What does fancy mean aesthetically in the folk cultural tradition of Trinidad? These are deeper meanings to the arts that brought us from that time to this time. Son, rumba, mambo, kaiso, ska, mento, reggae, dub, and other things that have conquered the world. Art is art, but art has deeper philosophical, existential meaning. And we have to understand that. And we have to bring these into the classroom, along with their masters, the orishas. We have to bring them into our classroom with the masters, the lyrical masters, the Jimmy Cliffs, the Stitches, the Chronics, the David Rudders, the Kitcheners. We have to bring these into our classroom, because more than anything else in our recent history, it is what our forebearers brought into their heads that they use and reveal and construct and reconstruct in the Caribbean in order to deal with their condition of enslavement and colonial subjection. So we will end there. I think that the creative potential of our people and their cultural reach globally cannot be underestimated. It is there. Bring these things into our classrooms. Bring these things into our classroom. We are not just doing ourselves a disservice, but we are doing our ancestors. And we cannot speak for ourselves if we cannot speak for our ancestors. We first must speak for our ancestors to be able to speak for ourselves. It is the art that bided us all of this time. And these artistic forms were denigrated. They were denigrated. Revival people still have to be hiding and wearing masks in Jamaica today, in the 21st century. And one of the most creative spaces in Jamaica, you go there, it's a revival space. Revival tables are masterpieces of art. Revival tables remind me of Leroy Clark's paintings of grandeur. We have to understand the deeper meanings to the arts, to creativity, to imagination, and to do what Prince Buster said just about 2 years after independence in Jamaica. It takes creation to build a nation. This is what he sung in one of his songs. It takes creation to build a nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hutton. Thank you very, very, very much, Professor Hutton. And I'd love the persons who are present to give us your reactions. I see the chat box saying most profound, lots of food Thank you, Professor Hutton. But I'd love to see the reactions going, because guess what? Professor Hutton has actually touched on a point, a validation. We can't forget our past. Lest we forget, we will not know what we're doing. We will not even know how creative we are being if we forget our past. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the call has been made that we cannot forget the arts. And today we will look at day 1, which is visual arts, but we will not forget day 2, which is literature and the arts, and day 3, music and the aesthetics. Professor Hutton, you span all these areas. You have depth in all these areas, but you have touched on the point. We cannot forget where we come from as we go forward. Lest we forget, lest we lose our understanding of where we come from, not only as Jamaicans, but as Caribbean people, we will lose ourselves and lose our ways. Again, sir, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for introducing what we know will be an excellent 3 days. And you have made a call for action, not just of the persons here, but of educators, of those persons who touch the lives of others going forward. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for being an advocate. And again, thank you for opening today's conference. Of course, I know this is one of your babies. This is one of the brainchilds that you've had. And I see the broad smile, sir. I say thank you. Thank you ever so much for not only making the call, but also making sure that you walk the talk. Thank you ever so much, sir. Thank you again. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am told that the minister, our own, Babsy Grange, is in the room, and I would like her to come in here because she has heard our call, and she has been an advocate for the arts. She has spent her whole life advocating for the arts. She has been involved in almost every picture through the generations. Again, I call upon our own, the Honorable Babsy Grange, to carry greetings to this conference.
Thank you, Dr. Pinnock. Thank you, Dr. Dunkley. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Pinnock, Professor Hutton, Professor Palmer Diesel, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. You're hearing me okay?
Loud and clear, ma'am. Loud and clear.
Thank you. Let me begin by expressing my appreciation for having been asked to open this important conference on Caribbean culture, arts, aesthetics, and education, which falls during the celebration associated with the 185th anniversary of this august institution. As Minister with responsibility for gender affairs, it is not lost on me that the Mico was created through the generous Lady Mico Charity in 1835, having emerged from her will, created from as far back as June 1670. Lady Jane Mico initially had expressly funded almshouses for poor widows over the age of 50 years, as well as poor boys in Gloucester, England. But by 1827, Lady Mico's legacy had increased in value of £120,000. And through the efforts of Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton, then Member of Parliament for Weymouth, the funds were channeled to educate emancipated Africans in the West Indies. I'm proud that we bear witness to what is now the oldest teacher training institution in not only the Western Hemisphere, but also the English-speaking world. This conference also falls within the United Nations designated International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. Originally declared in 2019 at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly, this initiative identified the ongoing need to support developing countries and countries with economies in transition in diversifying production and exports, including in new sustainable growth areas such as the creative industries. In my address to the high-level meeting on culture and sustainable development on the occasion of World Day for Cultural Diversity for Dialogue and Development, May 21, 2021, I underscored the intrinsic value of the cultural and creative industries and the role the sector plays to national economic development, especially as we seek to rebound from the disruptions caused by the global pandemic. At that time, I stated, Jamaica recognizes the role the creative sector must play as economies around the world look toward building back better after COVID-19. The cultural and creative industries also contribute to the quality of life of our country by way of their capacity for recreation and enhancement of productivity and their contribution to individual incomes and national revenues. So as such, the conference is focused on the visual arts in the person of Leroy Clark, visual artist, poet, and philosopher, Jean Binta Breeze, dub poet and storyteller, and the musical genius of Lee Scratch Perry, producer and songwriter, is therefore most apt and appropriate. We must view this conference as a part of the process to pivot to greater reliance on the cultural and creative industries, as not just avenues for the creative expressions of our people, but also as the provider of ecosystem of new occupations and the attendant economic benefits that accompany this shift. In facilitating this process, my ministry has activated Jamaica Creative, and that it's formally the National Cultural and Creative Industries Council, which is mandated to create an enabling environment for the development and growth of the Jamaican cultural and creative industries. To demonstrate our commitment to the creative sector, and during the pandemic, we said, let us make something happen. And so this unit has spearheaded the Jamaica Creative Paint Up Your Creative Space mural project that has created and erected murals in downtown Kingston and Port Royal, and has now mounted the largest mural in Kingston on the walls of the historic Savannah Park. Murals have also been painted at the Public Broadcasting Corporation complex in Halfway Tree, and work is currently taking place to complete Jamaica's tallest and highest mural on the face of Silo 10 at the Caribbean Cement Rockford complex. And this is a partnership between us, this ministry, Jamaica, and Mexico. Additionally, through the EU UNESCO Expert Facility on the Governance of Culture for the implementation of the 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, Jamaica is now taking concrete steps toward preparing a Cultural and Creative Economy Act, pioneering landmark legislation that will govern and facilitate the development of our creatives and the creative industries. It is envisioned that this act will be promulgated as part of the Jamaica 60 Diamond Jubilee activities in 2022. And when we speak of culture and the creative economy and the creative communities, we're speaking about our traditional culture, we're speaking about our cultural communities, and we're speaking about our creative people. Mr. President, I invite Mico to become a part of this important process. Indeed, we need to use this institution conceived as a training tool for upliftment of formerly enslaved Africans to tell their descendants about themselves and their own creative acumen. These trainee teachers will, in other words, need to embrace the greatness of challenges originally posed to our first national hero, Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey. That is to inculcate an awareness of the richness of Black history through creativity and culture to Black people. Indeed, to sell Black people to themselves. This charge seeks to build on the very creditable initiatives made by Mico, such as the Nakum Buka, We Remember conference and series of activities staged from as early as 2003 in association with the Institute of Jamaica and the INAFCA Museum. So I look forward, Mr. President, to your thought-provoking presentation on Robert Nesta Marley from our poets and writers, including Owen Blacker Ellis, Yassa Safari, Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks, and from our musicologist, Dr. Dennis Howard, and Herbie Miller, Director Curator at the Jamaica Music Museum. I'm further intrigued by presentations to be made on Obia, or voodoo art, and the Watttown Revival Procession. Indeed, all the presenters are to be commended as we run the gamut of interrogating our cultural and creative practices. To that end, I wish to congratulate and commend Professor Clinton Hutton on his most interesting and exciting presentation. As someone who has come out of the Chocamo Lawn experience of West Kingston, born and raised in West Kingston, which was and still is a melting pot of Kumina, revival, ska, rocksteady, reggae, a bar and a church in every corner where the spirit reigned, both with the white rum and the spirit in those who would get possessed at the various Kumina sessions and revival ceremonies. Professor, your presentation resonated with me, and it just brought me back when at the age of 13, I was at a revival table, and that was where I met Edward Philip George Seaga in person. So Professor, I also commend you and your team for organizing this very important conference. And I implore you, Professor, to ensure that the papers and recordings are shared with the National Library of Jamaica, and that consideration be given to broadcasting the presentations at a later date through the Public Broadcasting Corporation of Jamaica. I will be more than happy to facilitate this process. So it is now, Mr. President, my sincere pleasure to declare the Conference of Caribbean Arts, Aesthetics, and Education open. And I thank you for giving me this honor. Blessings all. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you ever so much. And again, we say thank you for promoting the arts. Thank you for recognizing our own Professor Clinton Hutton. And thank you ever so much for opening our conference on a note that you are not only giving the speech, but you're integral in it, and we see you making the moves. Thank you ever so much for the moves that you have made in Parliament, for the moves that you have made on the ground, because sometimes I go out and I see you in the weirdest places, is what I won't say. Not only related to the arts by extension, but being related to the arts in everything that you do. Thank you ever so much. And thank you for opening our conference today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have opened with a bang, bang, ba bang, ba bang, bang, bang. And I don't think that it's going to get any less than bigger bang. We now call up on our other panelists. We have the day filled. We will call upon Professor Opal Palmer Adisa, consultant, general specialist, and cultural activist, author, poet, former director of the Institute of Gender Studies. She will be leading the panel that comes between at 11 to 12:20 today. We also have paper presentations, art as therapy, led by Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks, and I would say award-winning actress, writer, storyteller, artiste, Nita Meeks, performance poet, broadcaster, and martial arts practitioner. We also have visual arts profession, Joshua Higgins, making paper presentations as well. That will end today. Tomorrow, we will also have a day where we celebrate the literatures and the arts. Professor Carolyn Cooper, I already see you in the room. I see you active and engaged in what is happening today. And we say thank you as you will chair tomorrow. Tomorrow's panel, The Legacy of Jean Binta Breeze. Our panelists, our own Owen Blacker Ellis and Yasu Safari. Again, we have 3 days packed where we look at the arts, the visual arts, the literatures, as well as music and aesthetics. The day has started with a ba-bang, ba-bang, bang, bang. And we are now going to hand over and go over to Professor Opal Palmer Adisa, who will lead the session that comes next. Thank you ever so much for being here, for opening with us. And we say thank you as we get ba-bang, ba-bang, bang, bang, and bigger. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Dunkley. Thank you. I'm going to say Professor Oliver Grange, Minister Oliver Grange, and Clinton. I'm very excited to chair this panel. One is because I've known Leroy Clark for almost, I think more than 40 years. And two, because I'm with old friend Senrulin Kodja, who hosted the first conference that invited me, I won't even say how long ago, for the first International Caribbean Women Writers Conference, Selwyn, Carol Boyce Davies, that's my girl, we go back. And so it's very exciting. But I'm particularly excited because Leroy Clark provides us, I think, with a blueprint for what it means to be an artist in the Caribbean and what it means to really be Caribbean. And so let me just very quickly, for those of you who might not have read, a prolific painter, writer, and archivist, Leroy Clark is one of the foremost Caribbean master visual artists whose work and philosophy integrate and bridge the past with the present to create and present a new reality for African Caribbean people to move forward, refashioning our colonial legacy while affirming our diverse and rich heritage that has gifted the new world. Clark's work invites us to engage with ourselves, to engage with history, to engage with what we know on a visceral level, and Clinton talked about that in his presentation, what we know on a visceral level, as well as what we come to know. And what has been maligned about African identity, Obi, and all of these other things that we practice. He was able to penetrate beyond the pain and confusion that colonialism has created in us, and with minute details reveal another part where we could build our own house on our own terms, and we're still trying to do that. Clark's commitment to his craft, to teaching, to documenting his work, to erecting a legacy can and should serve as a blueprint for emerging artists to live, create, and carve out a designated space in which to conduct and develop their creativity. In this panel, each panelist will speak to the specific aspect of Clark's legacy and commitment to his society through the production of his art. And I want to say, I did tell people they had 15 minutes, but I think Clinton has kind of jumped on, so we probably have 10 minutes. And we do want to leave an opportunity for the participants to engage with us. So I'm going to very quickly read through the bios of all the presenters, and then they will begin. Our first presenter will be Professor Carol Boyce Davies, who is the Rhodes Professor of Humane Letters and of Africana Studies and Literature in English at Cornell University. She's the author of Left of Karl Marx, The Political Life of Black Communist Claudia Jones, a very, very important work. Black Women Writing and Identity, Migrations of the Subject, 1994. Caribbean Spaces, one of her works that I loved and have reviewed. And she's also published 13 critical editions on Africa, African diaspora, and Caribbean literature and culture as a 3-volume encyclopedia of the Africana diaspora in 2008. And Claudia Jones Beyond Containment, Autobiographical Reflections, Poetry Essays, that came out in 2011. Her forthcoming contracted monograph is titled Alternative Presidents, Black Women's Right to Political Leadership, and her popular essays and reviews have been published in media, including The Guardian, The Washington Post, The Crisis, Miss Magazine, The Black Scholar, Miami Herald, Trinidad Express, Guardian, Caribbean Today, Caribbean Contacts, and News. And I don't know, Carol, if I should spill the beans to tell people what we're up to. I'll let you do that, what we're up to for 2020 to celebrate Jamaica's independence, and one of the great intellectuals, Sylvia Winter, but maybe we'll keep that there. Then Selwyn Kudja, as I said, is an amazing fellow person that I really love, professor of Africana Studies at Wesleyan College, born in Trinidad and Tobago. He has taught at Harvard, Cornell, Ohio, Fordham University. He has written several books, including The Slave Master of Trinidad, William Harding Burnell, and the 19th Century Atlantic World. His most recent work, is articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the columnist for the Trinidad Express. And Professor Kudja, a friend of Leroy Clark for over 40 years, described Clark as one of Caribbean's artist genius who should be honored and praised for his contribution to our civilization. Professor Clinton Hutton doesn't need an introduction, but I will. Noted painter and photographer, is the director of the Institute of Technology and Educational Research at Mico. He's an award-winning researcher and author with a distinguished record of research publications, including 4 books: Color for Color, Skin for Skin, Marching with the Ancestral Spirits into War, at Morant Bay, numerous book chapters and journals, articles, scores of works of an artistic nature. His artistic works have been published by the University of the West Indies Press, Temple University, Verso, Oxford University, People Tree Editions, Caribbean Quarterly, Jamaica Journal, Routledge, Ian Randall Publishers, British Broadcasting Corporation, the National Museum and Art Gallery of Trinidad and Tobago, and others. And he has made over 100 conference presentations and has initiated and organized many conferences. He retired as Professor of Caribbean Political Philosophy, Culture, and Aesthetics at the University of the West Indies. Miss Atalia Springer is a Trinidad-born writer, media, and cultural worker with an interest in the intersections between cultural, memory, festival arts, and social justice. She has spoken on Afro-Caribbean spiritual retentions, mass and grassroots Caribbean movements at conferences in Iceland, Brazil, Nigeria, Haiti, and India, and has had commissioned essays published by Tate Britain, Stephen Friedman Gallery, New Daughters of Africa, and the Global Black Scholar. She's also director of Ida Kida Group, a collective of women in her family creating cultural interventions for social change. And in 2021, she produced a doc drama of Kambule, a play written by her mother, Aintu, an amazing poet and activist that documents the 1981 Kambule riots. Her most recent project is the Wajanga Discotheque, a Belmont-based artist collaboration exploring the intersection between Trinidad and Tobago music, visual, and literary archives. And then just briefly on me, I am Professor Opal Palmer-Disa, cultural activist and gender specialist. I have 3 different books coming out this year, which is kind of nice. The first is Portia Dreams, which is the children autobiography biography of Portia Simpson Miller, the first female Prime Minister of Jamaica, which will be published by the Foundation and Carlong Publishers. The second, which is 100 Voices Plus for Miss Lou, which is an edited anthology that celebrates the life of Miss Lou in poetry, tributes, and essays, and which has the wonderful minister, Minister Grange, and it's published by the UWI Press. And then my own, The Storyteller's Return, which is a story poems about home and returning by Ian Randall Press. I have been anthologizing over 400 magazines and have done residencies in Egypt, Brazil, Germany, and elsewhere. And I'm also working on a special issue of Jamaican music with interviews with such people as Jimmy Cliff, Sean Paul, Judy Mowat, Big Youth, et al. And that should come out before the end of this year. So we're going to go right into it. I have my phone and my timer. So Carol, please, welcome. So great to see you. Go ahead with your presentation. Unmute, Carol. You're still muted. Unmute so I could set the clock. And if you could try to keep it within 11 minutes, I would appreciate it. This way we'll each have time and an opportunity to engage the participants.
I like that. Keep in mind that we were initially given 15 minutes.
I know.
Right. Good morning, and thank you, Dean Dunkley and Clinton, for that amazing introduction, and the Minister for your presence, and all the wonderful greetings we've had so far. You know, those of us who are from the Caribbean and live and work in the United States, I'm initially from Trinidad and Tobago, invariably when we are called back to do any work like this, we are so pleased to do it, but also see it as a necessity, an obligation, and a requirement just for being scholars in the larger diasporic context. But beyond that, for me, it's a distinctly special pleasure, since quite a few amazing synchronicities, one can call them. I was always in the company of Leroy Clark, along with Clinton Hutton and Opal Palma-Adisa, in his house, in a repo, and in Legacy House as well, in Cascade, also in Mount Hope when he lived there. So this is an amazing. But I want to say first, the amazing conjunction and the reason why I said when I was asked to do this, yes, right? Another thing is that Leroy Clark, when I was visiting Professor Fulbright in Trinidad, reached out to me because he kept saying, and I am bold enough to say this here, that he felt the Caribbean intellectuals were always blocking him from, he actually used that word, from full revelation and full participation in terms of who and what he was and what his work was supposed to be. He felt dissed by UE. All the time he would say this, and he felt that the Caribbean intellectuals saw him as just extra, never called on him seriously, and so on. So we have to really recognize how we sometimes in our own home context work with the artistic geniuses in our presence, because that's what he was. And in the street, I was surprised when he would tell me this is how he is treated. Like, what? But sometimes this is how the Caribbean treats its own people. We have to really, hopefully, really push past and move beyond all of that. Anyway, so I'm talking about African diaspora memory and the Leroy Clark aesthetic of the shadow. And I've talked about this in a larger context, actually in an event, a conference that was organized for his 70th birthday. So what I'm doing is giving you a bit of that work, simply because it was a piece that he really wanted me to do, and which I did. I start deliberately, and I'm happy to, with a quote from J.D. Elder, who was my professor when I was in Ibadan. He was actually on my thesis committee, dissertation committee, because he was a visiting prof in Nigeria at the time, but he was known as a major cultural exponent in Trinidad and Tobago. And I heard Attila say earlier when we were chatting that she's going to working on a documentary on Best Village, which would definitely have to include some of his ideas, because this is one of his really important contributions. That and the Tobago Festival were major contributions of J.D. Elder. But this is what he says about Leroy Clark. Once the Afro-Caribbean artist, by virtue of his achieving quote unquote universal consciousness, attempts to deal with the African experience through writing or painting or any other art media, he is certain to find himself perennially bombarded by waking dreams and visions, centuries-old archetypes and defeats, travail, oppression, and constraints of African people, all clamoring for expression. This is in a piece called Totem and Icon in Leroy Clark's art. And I find it such an amazing summary of what the Leroy Clark aesthetic is, right? This is Leroy Clark from his first collection of poems, Duets. Quote, I will court their memory, and their memory of their memory will seize them, and their memory and their deeds will shoot out from them a sudden spring, a crash of calabashes, right? So I cite these deliberately because Leroy Clark's work, as you know, from the beginning to I Haiti, these are populated with these quote unquote waking dreams and visions, centuries old archetypes and defeats, travail, oppression, and constraints of African people, all clamoring for expression. Nowhere do you see that more vividly than in his I Haiti collection, right? But from the outset, we can assert that Leroy Clark is a master artist of negotiating the African diaspora counter discourse to the European aesthetic, and therefore unashamedly gave voice to those ancestral voices. His work for me then was alive with African diaspora memory, and he actually uses memory repeatedly in his work. So in studying his work, what I saw operating was what I define as the aesthetic of the shadow. And for me, the aesthetic of the shadow was his ability to deeply embed and emboss African diaspora memory, textuality, and so on in his art as in his poetry. So what I did with his work, which he actually was happy and wanted me to do, particularly in the distances here, was really look at his poetry with my eyes as a literary cultural scholar to see what he was saying and to give it some expression. And this is what I did, particularly in that introduction to the distances here, but also in the other work, such as this one that I've done on his entire production. So for me then, this aesthetic of the shadow was a deliberate choice, particularly when I contemplated some of the other intertextualities in his neighborhood. Intertextuality for me became a concept which allowed me to understand how his work engaged the artist's surrounding universe and was in conversation with them. The idea of the shadow also was confirmed for me when in an earlier essay, he says that among his greatest influences were Alfred Kodayo, Miles Davis, the musician, and the Calypsonian shadow. So for me, the shadow now end up working doubly, right? Because the music of the shadow is often an accompaniment of his creative work, was an accompaniment of his creative work. I keep using is because he's not for me past at all. It's more like present, past, but accompaniment of his creative work and journeys to and from his various creative locations. But I see the shadow then, the shadow, which as I said, is embossed in his work as one of the triggers for his creative expression. So in one of my interviews with him, the artist, I asked him why. And his answer was that with shadow, one gets an encounter, Shadow the Calypsonian then, and I'm glad that Clinton brought up David Rudder and others, but shadow for him, for Leroy Clark, gave him that encounter with that inner self, that place of Afro-Caribbean philosophy, pain and suffering, joy, but clarity in its verbal and mnemonic incantations. The wail is there, that wail of the Bob Marley wailers. And so is the chant as well. Shadow, are you feeling the feeling? Shadow harbors then that place of African diaspora memory, which Leroy Clark is able to meet him aesthetically at. In my view, then it also comes from that same place where jazz originates, in which a Louis Armstrong went to get to his deep gutturals, which some have likened to the deep sonic articulations of certain ancestral masquerades, or the wailing of a Bob Marley and Peter Tosh that is articulated across the African diaspora, even when we do not share the same language. And I say this because in Brazil, I did a lot of research in Brazil, and a lot of the Rastas in Brazil often didn't understand what Bob Marley was saying. But when he went to oyo, 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 they knew exactly what that was. So all of the surrounding meta language, as the scholars would call it then, become also linguistic ways in which we communicated, even when the various European languages did not work. And Clinton gave a lot of really amazing examples of how that works as well, right? So the shadow aesthetic for me then, which you see in Leroy Clark's work from the start, if you look at now his early piece from the Studio Museum of Harlem, kind of an eruption of an ancestral figure with those same memories that people his universe. It's a kind of eruption of funk that one gets also in African-American culture. And this is important because when we think of Leroy Clark, for me, I don't really see him, Opal, as only a Caribbean artist. I see him as an artist of the Americas, plural, simply because he is really heavily influenced by the Black Arts movement. This is where he begins, actually. Mm-hmm. And if people miss that, they miss the fact that this is somebody engaging with James Baldwin, with Leroy Clark or Amiri Baraka, with the whole range of contributors in that time frame, and looking at how the Americas, a so-called New World, North, South, Central America, the Caribbean, carry forward and recreate all of the various aspects of our histories, the negative, the positive that Clinton really gave us very early on, but the ways in which out of that, like the quilters, we create beauty, we create joy, we become stereotypically the happiest people in the world. I don't know, but we maintain, we want to hold on to our joy, right? So the shadow then is also the carbon copy of the individual's tangible existence, right? It is psychology deeply, we know as well. It's the whole question of the vampire, the obeah, all of the assorted spirits we know that do not have shadows. The shadow then is a deep mark of one's humanity, which he tries to create and give life, even when they have no visible representation, and which is what the shadow is, not so? So the aesthetic of the shadow also I found interesting. We have another articulation in a formation that W.B. Du Bois contributed called the Shadow of Shadows, cited by Brent Hayes Edwards in an article he wrote in 2003. There, Du Bois proposed that historiography perhaps is spun not so much through oppositions and binaries as in layers. And I love the idea of layers, because basically we're talking about the fact that you have on top of one thing something else, a tracking then of a certain set of eruptions that move beyond the sort of photographic negative, which we think of, something ephemeral and something faint, but definitely a set of movements that are layered one on top of the other. When you look at Leroy Clark's work, this is what you see. So for me, it's not so much transposing, which Saba, my friend, indicates in his piece, and we spent a lot of time debating this word, because I don't see it as transposing, because that presupposes that there's an original somewhere, as opposed to the layering of different experiences that different artists get from listening to music, listening to a waterfall, rain, whatever. All of those are intertextual connections that we get. The three little birds, right, on my doorstep, intertextuality right there. So the shadow aesthetic for me exists in a larger sense than that of creating an alternative epistemological structure that challenges Euroaesthetics, which has attempted to erase the original African epistemes or knowledge systems. In other words, replacing its knowledge system and putting it on top of ours and wanting to bury ours as we then go into mimicry, that Napoleon mimicry. For those who would mimic then or double themselves, which is another word Leroy Clark would use all the time when he made fun of the Trinidadian preoccupation with doubles. He was saying they would double themselves to death, eating shit without knowing it, you know, Leroy Clark, right? He has sympathy, sometimes others contempt, often invective. So for Leroy Clark, it's a resounding no to that well-documented post-colonial mimicry and a yes instead to the possibility of African diaspora self-creation. That creative possibility is already there, he says, and it indicates in our historical and cultural context the way in which we move to what he defined as his El Tikush, the highest mountaintop in Trinidad, available for other visionaries if they want to go there, right?
Right. 12 minutes, Carol. So
okay, so let me just finish up. The shadow aesthetic then for Leroy Clark operates for me just under the radar of his giant contributions. In some ways, it overrides the art. It's also ancestral writing, which appears, as you know, as stick figures that people, his books, all on the sides of his books, you will see these figures as a kind of memory writing that appears in the body of the art itself, many of which are literally overwritten with the memory writing or hieroglyph. And finally, an attempt to find another expressive avenue in words and memory. And I'll just read in closing the last poem from, as a last statement, one of his poems, right? So he says, then in Archipelago, and then in waiting ports, its whips, its scales, its chains, choice died, denial became privilege, promise was prayer with wayward wings, and so with backward turned feet, he entered his landscape laughing with each death. History pretends amnesia here. And finally, in rainbows, I know now our vague rainbows, I know now our vague reflections. I shy away, weak with education, only dream restores my potency. Everything I cherished before, gone without cry. Silence is gone, and Earth Mother appears. Only this moment, outside the eyes of time, and her arms like bandages. The poem is woman. In her beginning and the end of the earth, always woman. Earth, the womb door, living, receiving, the limbo of life's dance. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Carol. I really appreciate and respect you honoring the time. And we will come back to the whole notion of the shadow aesthetics that you speak about. And yes, I agree that Clark was definitely more than the Caribbean because of his long position in Brooklyn, in New York, and the Black Arts Movement and his connection with those poets and artists. Next, we will have Selwyn Cudgel. Selwyn, my friend, welcome. Take it over. I know he was there because we were joking before.
He was having problems with internet. But
Are we done? Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we are, Selwyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very, very much. I'm going to share a bit of my presentation, but I'm going to be within the time. First of all, I really want to thank Clinton for inviting me, and thanks also for Opal, seeing her again after all these years. Thanks also, and good to see also Attila. Again, I want to be so thankful. I'm so grateful for the two marvelous speeches that Clinton did, and of course, followed again by a marvelous presentation by, of course, Carol. I met Leroy. I've called my piece Leroy Clark, or Artistic Genius Unbound. I met Leroy Clark about 45 years ago at Trinidad Lime on a mutual friend's home in Port of Spain. From that time, we developed a deep friendship until he passed away a few months ago. I visited him early last year, just before the Trinidad and Tobago government closed its borders due to the COVID pandemic. That was the last time that I saw him. However, my most lasting memory of Leroy Clark occurred in 1980, after I published my first book, Resistance in Caribbean Literature. Overjoyed with my accomplishment, I visited Leroy at his studio at the Heights of Aripo and showed him my book. The front cover displayed two coconut trees waving in the breeze. With a disdain that only Leroy could convey with his big rolling eyes and schoolmaster sternness, he declared, "A big hardback black man like you have two coconut trees waving on the front cover of your book? You should be ashamed of yourself." 3 years later, I bought my first Leroy Clark painting. He was having an exhibition at the studio in Port of Spain. I saw a piece of his work that I liked. As I sought to buy it, Leroy gave me a wink eye that suggested, "Leave it alone. I will handle it." Well, I left it alone. After the exhibition ended, I bought the painting from Leroy at 2/3 of the price at which it was offered. I suspect the gallery would have gotten that third as its commission. That painting still hangs in my living room today. Leroy had worked at the Harlem Studio Museum and was particularly intrigued by the work of Roma Berdun. Although I was not an art connoisseur, I was somewhat familiar with Berdun's The Family that was, of course, painted in 1948. But there was something else that touched me about Leroy's painting. It spoke to me in a personal way. It brought so many echoes of my family past. My grandmother was a member of the Orisha faith. 1 week in November, she gave up home and family and headed to the Palais to assist Mother Gerald, the chief practitioner of the Shango festivities. There she would cook the unsalted meats for the festival. Whenever I returned home, I lived in the US, I would visit the Palais to recover some missing part of me, something akin to the kind of repossession that Clark talked about when he spoke at Clinton Hutton's painting exhibition in 2010. It was that attempt to interrogate the essence of our existence, shorn of all the accoutrements that the Western world had tried to impose upon us, which led Leroy which Leroy tried to express in his work. In 2002, in an article entitled Meditation of a Genius, I made 3 observations about Leroy's art and the effect it had on me. First, I noted, Leroy Clark is the finest of our generation, the supreme representative of our pains, our sufferings, and our strivings, the most inspiration of our prophets, and the spiritual architect of our becoming. His work transcends the politics of our everyday life and precariousness of our narrow existence. At its best, it permeates into our unconsciousness and demands that we explore the meaning of our existence. Second, when I see him in person, hear him speak on the radio, or capture his presence in our television, I'm struck with admiration. I know that this man, walking upon this earth at this time, has given and continues to give so much to us. He speaks and I am enraptured. His erudition takes me into that part of myself and my people's history that has been mired by wretchedness and certainly forgiveness and the kinds of things of which Hutton spoke. When he expresses himself via the visual medium, I'm lifted by his spiritual integrity, the nobility of his undertaking, and the evanescence of his artistic enterprise. In one sweeping moment, he bids us return to the redemptive foundation of our being. In his overall works lie many signatures of our salvation. Third, for his ontological vision, Clark emerged as the quintessential Caribbean artist. His work encapsulates the joyous spirituality of our ancestral homeland, the shamanistic quality of our Caribbean experience, and the carnivalesque a la Batkin of sweet TNT. He is our master blaster, our guru, our lover, our friend. He beckons us to explore worlds yet unconquered and implores that we ascend the altar couch of our existence. Although painting was Leroy's true forte, as Carol, went into great depths, he was adept, and I think, at poetry as well. In Parables of Our Joyous Days, epithet for a citizen, Clark describes himself, quote unquote, as the poet who paints with words. In 1981, he produced Duens, poems and drawings, which I thought was one of his most compelling books of poetry, which he signed for me. And of course, again, Leroy, in his elegance signed, he says, with, I suspect, compelling invocation for Sullivan towards erecting our sovereign architecture. And that was Leroy. His concern was, how do we create ourselves and recreate ourselves by digging into our past and trying to understand who exactly we were, trying to get to the essence of our being. I think Clinton spoke about epistemology, etc., but he was trying always to get to that. And one reason I think why, as Carol said, he was so rejected by the university, etc., and those folks, they never quite understood what he stood for and what he was and how he tried to sort of empower us. However, in that book, Duens, Leroy shocked our sensibilities when he declared, quote unquote, carpenter, shoemaker, dancer, wirebender. Let me be the artist, poet, farmer. I will fork this earth with my tongue. Let me plunge into the air through syllables of violet, the science of turquoise, through populous ochres and energetic reds, through fathomless greens, through supplicant blues, through the arterial vegetation of the rainbow. Like Derek Walcott, our next Caribbean giant, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti, just to call one of them name, who was, of course, an English poet and painter, Clark brought a painterly eye to his poetry. There's always that other dimension, that painterly eye. Take off that. Of course, one discerns that duality in the stanzas: cults of relative consonants, variegated coats at the edging, greens of greenish yellow and blue-green, spiced earth, okra smells, morning celebrations, half-eaten islands of fruit, bird spit, brown, gold-tint flakes of rust, scabs of age, sharp vowels of pronounced fire, verbile red, squeezed oranges, wounded vermilion, startled uteruses, roaring incest, and chlorophyll. Of course, it was that kind of richness. You could literally, as you read Leroy, see the painting, see the other dimension of this tremendous genius. His poetry was also shaped by the richness of African culture. Of course, the many rivers that we had to cross, a la Jimmy Cliff's by the rivers of Babylon, when we arrived on these shores. In his desire to cultivate a home in the Black diaspora, Clark deployed a lot of these images of rivers and waters and seas and crossings to capture this new reality. I think Carol has done a fantastic job of showing, of course, Leroy's sort of emergence as a new world, a Caribbean and an African-American in that larger sense, of course, but some of his works remind you of people like Langston Hughes, who did, of course, some of the similar things in things like Negro Speaks of Rivers, etc. In Who I Cry, of course, the next major one, other book I just want to take a look at very briefly is, of course, Parables. In Who If I Cry, Clark invokes the importance of his roots as the springboard of his genius and to reposition himself in his spiritual landscape. Where am I heading? I ask myself. I am moving towards something that awaits me to complete itself, perhaps only, perhaps it will complete me. He was, of course, concerned about where did he find himself and how was he really operating in his own space. In those last days, however, when, of course, he was not doing as well, he, of course, raised the question and began to speak of his own mortality. He said, of course, in prefacing my own epitaph in Parables he says, in my rather short stint with this immensely impossible world and me in it, I can say with some certainty, in resignation to moments that constricts me, that I have been given to a strange calling from something that compels me to take the lead. I must leave, to go somewhere, to go where something awaits me to complete it. That somewhere will fulfill itself, knowing full well that it may not fill me, abysmally perhaps repeating an unending apprenticeship. Clark, of course, was always concerned about where he was going and what was happening in his own life. He says, of course, in 2020, I ended my tribute to Clark's work with the following encomium. For many of us, he's that bright light of confidence and hope. He shines with radiance of a blindingly kindly light. Noro Aboga, first and past president of Sony and master conductor, says that when he thinks of a certain one of his friends, he thinks about, quote unquote, the Chinese character san, which means to shine dazzlingly like the sun. It's not simply a matter of brightness. Sans means an extraordinary radiance. This extraordinary radiance has come to characterize Leroy Clark's work. In a review of 3 recent books about Dante's work entitled Why Dante's Divine Light Shines, Robert Chandler makes the following statement. The art historian Martin Kemp, in his richly illustrated Visions of Heaven, argues that Dante deeply influenced the next few centuries of Italian painting, both through the clarity of his visual detail and through his boldness in trying to describe extremities of divine light beyond the scope of our urban sense of sight.
13 minutes, Koja, thanks.
Oh gosh, well, I'm at the end. I truly believe that Leroy Clark's work shall influence Caribbean artists and aesthetics for the rest of the 21st century. There is no doubt that the urgency of his mission pushed him beyond the conversations of his time and set a new height to which all coming Caribbean artists must aspire. They too would have to send their El Takuchi, the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, and who knows, perhaps their Pico Tarquino, the highest mountain point in Cuba, on which a bust of Jose Marti, the Caribbean liberator, is placed. One day, Leroy himself would be among the legendary and inspirational figures of our Americas. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you so much. And we're just going to go straight to Attila Springer and her presentation. We're not hearing you, Attila.
Everyone, can you hear me?
You're kind of breaking up, so we're not hearing you with great clarity.
Yeah, it says that my connection is unstable. Let's see if I can reconnect it.
No. Right now we're hearing you, so let's try to go with that.
Okay, all right. Let's try. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Before I begin my comments, I just want to start by pouring a little water for personal and community ancestors and those who have made their transition recently. You know, some of my fondest memories of Uncle Leroy have to do with spiritual practice. And so Uncle Leroy Clark. I pour water also for Jean Bintabreeze, who was also a very good friend of the family, and also for Lee Scratch Perry, who is part of my universe as a DJ, as a lover of music. I pour some water for Scratch. It all starts from Scratch. Okay, so say thanks, Professor Hutton, for including me in this conversation. I feel like a cockroach in a fowl party, as they would say in Trinidad, because, you know, the people who have preceded me in this conversation are some serious Caribbean luminaries. But, you know, this conversation is sort of like a reflection of how my entire life has been, you know, constantly dropping on the conversations of big people and continuation of that. And many of those times that I remember happened in Uncle Leroy's house or in Earl Jones's house, or, you know, surrounded by these people who are absolute giants to me. So I thought a lot about why I was included, and I think that perhaps my life has been a preparation for moments like this. And I'm coming to you from Belmont, behind the bridge, the cultural capital of Port of Spain. Right around where Uncle Leroy was born. But along the
Until we're really having some challenges hearing you.
And of course, let me see if I can make another connection. I'm trying to see if I can connect to another source.
Opal, sometimes they take down the volume, the video, the volume.
Right.
Audio is stronger, so she might have to do that.
Attila, you might have to take your video down to see if the audio is stronger and clearer.
Sure, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I was saying that I'm coming to you from behind the bridge, Belmont, the cultural capital of Port of Spain. So along this stretch, not only do you have Uncle Leroy in the hills of Gonzales, you also have Claudia Jones. On Casabon Lane, you have Horace Ove, who was born on Belmont Circular Road. You have Lancelot Lane, who was also born in Gonzales. You have Brother Resistance, who was further down behind the bridge. And of course, you also have the late great Winston Bailey, the shadow, who Carol spoke of earlier. So just to say a little bit about myself and to position myself in this conversation a bit. So I'm a writer and I'm really interested in culture and memory and those things that live so strongly and beautifully in the work of the beautiful and terrifying Uncle Leroy. And I want to be so bold as to say that I'm part of the process of what he described in his work as recharting the ruin. He asked that question in his work, who will rechart the ruin? And I feel like for that generation of people who grew up with me, who were the children of the artists and the activists and the visionaries of that generation, you know, we got a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. So it wasn't just that I grew up in a Pan-African household, it was that I was raised in a household of artists. I was part of a community of people who had spent their youth imagining a new Trinidad and Tobago, creating national symbols and an idea of who we are. It was such a wild time to be a child, surrounded by all these giants. And from the time I can remember myself, I was not only visiting the homes of my parents' friends and contemporaries, but I was also overhearing a lot of conversations that were many times heated, many times explosive, most of the times way too grand for me to fully fathom. I was also experiencing the work that they were making. So when I was 10 years old, I was expected to look at a painting and be able to have an opinion on what I was seeing. I remember Miss Entu, who was at the time the chair of the museum board, getting involved in a bacchanal that had happened with the previous chair of the board, Claire Broadbridge, who was storing some of Uncle Leroy's paintings in a back room somewhere that was not properly climate controlled. You know, there was all of these things going on in the background and in the foreground of my experience of growing up that shaped as well my understanding of who I was in the society and who I had to grow up to be. And so just last week, I'm currently working on a documentary on Best Village. And just last week, I was doing an interview with someone who she was talking about the Meet the People tour, which happened in 1963 with Eric Williams. And she said, you know, I was one of the people who was assigned to represent my community of St. George West. And, you know, yeah, and Leroy was there and he was very encouraging. And, you know, he was the one who was liaising between us and Eric Williams. And he was so extremely confident and he made us all feel like we belonged in this conversation. This is a little girl from Belmont who was going to St. Francis College at the time. And so to encounter Uncle Leroy in a space like that I did not expect, and she just sort of casually mentions it, I feel like there's this constant presence in my life of the people who I grew up seeing and experiencing and not fully understanding who they were and what their impact was on the society that I was growing up in. I just want to also say that now that I am big and have sense, and I'm involved in, art movements and art communities in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, in London, in New York, and other spaces, both Carol and Professor Cudjoe talked about the fact that Leroy belonged to the world. And, the reality is that as a child, he was my first example of a successful Black man as an artist. And so before I knew of people like Chris O'Feely or Kehinde Wiley, there was Leroy Clark being his full African self representing in his art. I'm just running through because I wrote a very long thing. So I'm running through and pulling out the main points that I wanted to get across. Leroy had the walk or the crawl. I have seen this walk in other men, in beautiful, terrifying men like Earl Lovelace and Royal Gibbons and my own father. It's more than the fearlessness of a Bajan. It is the certainty of a stick fighter who enters the ring and sizes up an opponent.
I love it.
When that man,
God.
Are you hearing me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
When that man strides across the Gael to the place where the drummers are positioned and inclines his ear to the drums and instructs the Shantwell to sing the lavway that will send him deep inside his warrior self. You also see that walk, that crawl around 4 a.m. when you are too tired to know if you are asleep or awake. And then suddenly the air is electric because Ogun arrives and takes possession of the body of some slip of a boy. And the boy, who you have not noticed all night, is suddenly much bigger than you thought. His feet making deep, deep prints in the lipid floor. He was beautiful and terrifying like Ogun himself. And this was an energy that he cultivated. I remember just seeing him and always being like, how do you look so vexed all the time? And then his face would just burst into this most mischievous smile. And that ability to switch from fearless warrior to this gentle, sweet person that you want to be around, that you want to be in his presence and in his space. There is a kind of confusion and paralysis that goes on in your brain. And I feel like I constantly had that confusion and paralysis in my relationship with him. As I became an adult, as I became somebody who looked critically at his work and also looked critically at the work of the entire generation of my parents and also at my parents as well. I wondered at the things that were done. I wondered at their failures. I wondered at the things that we were silent about, that they were silent about. Why did these things go unchallenged in their behaviors? And there's something that the young people say right now, which is all your faves are problematic. And there is a way that we challenged. I saw them challenge each other intellectually. I saw them challenge each other socially. My father tells me a story about Uncle Leroy and Derek Walcott in New York at the home of a master artist, and Derek cutting Leroy down to size. And, my father expecting that the night came to blows, but Leroy, understanding that Leroy was biding his time, so that when he came back to Trinidad, there was this explosive relationship that happened between him and Derek that was very public, and that people perhaps couldn't understand, because there was always this relationship of the master and the mentor between the two of them. And this brings me to another anecdote that involves Leroy, which is in 2006, Trinidad and Tobago hosted CARIFESTA. And as part of the hosting of CARIFESTA, there was a fringe event organized called Galvanize. And it took place at a number of different locations. And I was involved in this. I was also involved in CARIFESTA. And one evening at CCA 7, there was a conversation going on between some contemporary artists who are quite established, who get lots of work outside of Trinidad.
13 minutes.
13 minutes already? Oh, good. All right. All right. So anyway, but there was this moment when they were complaining and saying, you know, like the establishment artists like Leroy, and so they don't give us space. And I said to them, I said, y'all don't realize that at the core, Leroy is a stick fighter, and he will not acknowledge you unless you come in the ring and confront him. And if he busts your head or you bust his head, that is the conversation that he understands. And it's so funny that in the last couple of days, Miss N2 gave me a poem from Uncle Leroy, which I think speaks to this idea that I have of him as a stick fighter. And I can't seem to find it right now, although I was very organized and put it where I wanted. Right. Oh gosh. I'll just read this very quickly and then I'm done. Is me the bois man, I ain't afraid. With tongue in my mouth, eye sharp in my head. You know I ain't afraid. Is me the bois man, I could never afraid. Rat stay in the hole, snake tight like they dead. Tell them, shorty, I am afraid. Aberdeen's son is me one. Bush shaking, monkey on the run. A tall for so, I am afraid. I could never afraid. As the only bois man that's afraid. So I'll finish there.
Thank you so much, and very appropriate indeed. Leroy was a stick fighter. Let me go to Clinton. 10 minutes, Clinton. Unmute and take your time.
Okay. Could the persons back at the center put on my slides? And so I'll just do a paragraph and then show some slides of Leroy Clark's work. Okay, all right, just hold it there. I want to just hail up my brethren, Duff, that is Duff Mitchell, Babu, Mary, and Daisy. I have been researching Leroy Clark for 17 years non-stop. So I've taken thousands of photos of his work, his travels through Trinidad, and other relevant things in Trinidad and Tobago, things relevant to his work. I have published 5 book chapters on him, etc., etc., etc. And I'm writing a book. But many of Leroy Clark's paintings are peopled with ancestral spirits, like Aberdeen, his mom, ancestral gods, ancestral memories, and Trinidad and Tobago's mythological characters, mingling, communing, interacting with the living as the existential basis for community agency, philosophy, and pedagogy. Ingredients for obeying our space. That is, for designing and framing an architecture of self, antithetical to colonial and neo-colonial conception and meaning of being. So I will just show some slides of the man and especially of his works. Is the characters in his paintings are mythological characters like Isukian, characters like Ogun, Mokojumbi. All of these characters are to be found in Leroy's work. Ishu, and his work is really, the constant thing about Leroy Clark's work is that Leroy Clark is always experimenting. That's the constant thing about his work. He's always experimenting, and he works within an open-ended mode of creativity that is akin to Pilau, to Kalalu, to Gombo, to Dub. And so that's him, and that's his work. So we'll just show his works with Leroy Clark. Go ahead, please. Those are, can you zoom out? Go back to the last two and zoom out, please. Zoom out that one. Okay, from there, yeah. No. Not that one, yes. That's not work. It's a vertical. So you can see the entire work behind him. No, not, no. The second one shows the extent of the work. Okay. It look like we're not going to see that. Go ahead, please. This is just a section of a work that you will see. It's a work like 18 feet up. These are huge pieces of work. Anyway, go ahead. What is that? Yes, this is me and my brethren. Spent many nights, countless nights, every year for weeks, going right through until morning, just talking about everything. And there's not a day that I don't think about him. Wow, good. Thank you.
So, Clinton, you have a few minutes?
No, you can take it.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it's really important that people, those of you who are not familiar with Leroy's work, saw some of those images and to see the expansiveness of them. Because one of the things that I always marveled at is how big and the intricate detail. So I'm going to share my screen and run through my presentation very quickly. All right. So one of the things, and I don't know why it's necessarily looking like that, but one of the things that I want to talk about, but I won't in any detail, is Leroy Clark archiving his work and why that is so important, which is what I say that he sets a blueprint for artists. So this is a picture the last time I was with Leroy in 219 at his home. And as Carol has said, Carol and myself and Hunton, as Clinton has been at Leroy's house several times where he has invited us there. And I met Leroy at the tender age of 17 in New York, just when I was about to enter Hunter College. And a friend who knew him said, "Do you know Leroy Clark?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You have to meet him." And so she took me to his apartment in Brooklyn. And I'll never forget that day because the music was going. Leroy was painting this humongous canvas. He was making us peanut punch. People were coming in and he never stopped working and all of that. This is a quote from Leroy. I gained an image of redemption, an image of putting yourself right. Genius is not a gender thing or color thing. And this was an interview I had with him, which was published, as you will see later, in Interview in the Caribbean, the journal that I'm the editor-in-chief of. And what everyone has said, I do want to counter. You either loved Leroy or hate him. He was unapologetic. He told you exactly what he was thinking. No kind of screens. He was passionate. He was opinionated. And he was a genius. And that's what I loved about him from the very beginning. One of the things I admired about him, and he encouraged me, and I have to say in one of my collections, which is called Eros Muse, I do credit Leroy because Leroy was one of the first professional writers, artists who I shared my work with, besides Kamau Brathwaite and Mervyn Morris, and who said I was a writer. And for the time I was in New York, he introduced me to amazing writers, Quincy True, Kera Petsy, the South African writer who died a couple of years ago. But one of the things that he was consistent about, and which is why I'm talking about archiving, he said, and he told me many times, don't let people after you're dead decide to paint the picture of who you are. You paint the picture of who you are. And that's why every work he produced, he put in a book. So, he was passionate. I know the touch of a woman who placed her soul in my hands. She asked me for a child, and I laughed at her innocence and hid from her my timid heart. Her tears follow me to manhood through arduous landscape with the emptiness of losing her. But she lives in me, her body in mine, as I climb that tormenting regret to root her in the privilege of my abandonment. And this is really profound and prophetic, those of us who knew about Leroy and his love for women and his declaration of being polygamous and all of those kinds of stuff. But what is most important here is I, EYE, and which it signals in a sense the Rastafarian I, and the fact that in his work he was very conscious of being the I, of seeing. And so for me that is also an important part of him. Of course, the first book of his that was done in 1974, Taste of Endless Fruit, a beautiful, beautiful collection of poems and drawings that he gave me. And of course, what Selwyn says is the way in which he inscribes, beautiful comments for each of us. And so this was a really important collection for me because I had not yet written my first collection, which came out in 79, a chapbook. But I remember when Leroy gifted me this, and I think it was in Trinidad, gone to visit him in Trinidad, whatever. But this work really signals, we talk about Leroy as a painter, but Leroy was very much a wordsmith. He was very much a wordsmith, and he was very careful with the way in which he used language. So he also inspired me to return, because I remember, again, another clear moment visiting him when he said he was returning to Trinidad. He was packing it all up and he was going to go there and he was going to build his house, which he has done. And you have to admire that in an artist who says, this is what I'm going to do and this is what he has done. He was unequivocal about living as an artist, unapologetically. He was an artist first, and that did cause him to, some might say, not necessarily put attention where he should in terms of family or children, although he was always surrounded by that. So, he said about returning and establishing a legacy. So an archive is a place where people can go to gather first-hand facts, data, and evidence for letters, reports. Leroy has that. He has created his legacy. He has created his archive. And, he and I talked a lot, not only just about poetry and his work. He was about evaluating and selecting and arranging his material, which is why each book is so specific. And he wanted to provide answers for people after he was gone. And he wanted to be able to have a ease in terms of publicity, not just the physical L2 space that he has created, but he wanted to make sure that when he has gone, but he will never go, that there were easy opportunity for talks and exhibition about his work. He wanted to be accessible. This was really something important. And I don't have one of the pictures, but in many of the books, you see him with children because he wanted to bring children and the new generation into that space. And sometimes he was fierce and intimidating, but he also invited school children to look at the work, to be in the work, to participate in a work on which he was doing, which is something I loved about him, his sense of assurance that others can participate in the creation of his work. So that in Interview in the Caribbean, of which I'm the editor, we did a special issue for Derek Walcott, volume 3, 27. And I did a long interview of Leroy in 2016. I was at his house for 2 weeks and I interviewed him about what I think all of us will agree is his most important work, High 80, which has about 200, and I think the last count was 250 pieces. And I don't know if it was in his will, but one of the things he said to me, and one of the things that came out in the interview, of which you can get, is that he said he wanted each island to have a piece of that work, that each piece of work was for an island. And I hope somehow that will be made possible, because that was something he said over and over. This piece is not just about Haiti or Haiti, it's about the Caribbean, and I want each island to have a piece. So I don't know if that was recorded in his will. So that's a very important interview. It's not a full interview, but those of you can get Interview in the Caribbean and you could see the interview that I did with him for that issue. In 2016, and so this is what I'm really talking about, that I spent that time with him, and he talked about his process. The conversations were taped. He talked about the series and the importance of this series in making it. Then I want to talk about three, just because there's a little time, just three pieces of his work, The Voice of Smoldering Cold, which came out in 2009. And in this piece, it is about for yourself. And again, that was something that he was insisting on. And so, there's the line, which is also in the line, and I have to figure out from a Daisy and Babu, and others will tell me what is happening with that. I was born in Gonvazels. A copper coin was placed on my navel. And this talks about African ancestry, it talks about spirituality, it talks about tradition and customs, which Leroy would literally bawl about the way in which we were not respecting and honoring these. And so this book and this collection is about that. It is the beginning, although all of his book is some version of his autobiography, which is What the Pavement Says, which the last time he shared it and I read it to him was 400 and on page. A Daisy and Babu can say more. And then this other collection, which is for Eileen, I in the word, so again, the consistent weaving of the I throughout his work. My poem begins as a lament inspired by circumstances. And there were many things about what we were doing or not doing that Leroy lamented about. And the last line in the text, which is August 1994, reads, I lay flat, my ear to the earth, under their breasts like new grass. Such an evocative and amazing image. And of course, his love for women and seeing women as those who were the seers for the future. He talked a lot about his mother and his relationship to her and what she suffered to bring him, all of those stories he kept repeating. And so this is part of what he gives us. And of course, I think this is his most amazing, although the last of the works I saw in 219, I was also blown away by, but this, I think, for Leroy, this work, Haiti is so important of his development. And it's about the cry and the suffering, not just of Haitian people, but of Black people everywhere. And what are we doing about that? How are we healing that? How are we going into the bowels of our history, into the bowels of our ancestry and doing that? None of us have really talked about Leroy as a chief. I don't like the word chief because I think it's a European hand-down diminutive word, and that we really were kings and queens and princesses. But Leroy was a chief of the Ifa religion, and that's an important part of his spirituality and his connection to Africa and ancestry. Kiss the moon, this is him. Kiss the moon held I among the branches, benedictions in the east room where gods tidy their sheaves, hollowed on moaning grounds, ghetto fates accredited by embroidered texts on flags of Eshu to Olodumare to Ogun to Shango to Yemonja to Oshun to Olorun, all toward strong enough to keep the corrugated roofs above our heads. The man was a genius. His use of language, his integration of the Orishas and the ancestry, his integration of Trinidad cosmology and the Caribbean cosmology, and as Carol rightfully says, his influence and impact from the Black arts movement and his connection with those people, with UMass Akeli, who was at, which birthday party was at, Carol, that we were at his house. All of this informed him. Leroy always worked with music. Certainly when I was around him, music was part of the foundation, and it was a diverse set of music, whether it was calypso or reggae, a lot of times calypso, UMass Akeli music, jazz, music was a part of the fusion of who he was. And so forthcoming, the prolific legacy. I know that his Daisy and others who are in charge of his place, he was doing Ubiquitous Thunder, and he said to me, how comes you're not in any of my books and I have all your books on my shelf? I want you to write a piece for this collection. And so Leroy and I, the year before, had gone through this, and I said, Leroy, you have to put this together. And these are some of the pieces he sent me, and I wrote an essay, which I hope when it comes out, that the pieces in it, and I want to say, but before exploring the details and matrix of his work. This is part of the essay I wrote. It has to be read as an expansion, or more accurately, an evolution of Taste of Endless Fruit that was published in 1972, in which Clarke's geometrics is evident as it is in all of his other paintings. Clarke's penchant for complex details speaks to the genesis of his work, in which he charts his reality of who we are meant to be from his musing with the spirits and our ancestors. As I enter ubiquitous thunder, I find myself in a carefully designed labyrinth where I'm expected to embody the space and pay keen attention to the connecting tunnels or lines. However, this can only happen through intuition, a core element of Eleusinian geometry, which was developed by Euclid of Alexandria, also known as the father of geometry. In this regard, Clarke is a guide, Papa Elegba. Attila talks about how he was sometimes mischievous and then stirred, who upon meeting you at the crossroads attempt to trick you just to discern if you will pause and take the right path. But in truth, there is no wrong path. Some might be more difficult than others. This is when intuition must take over. And just as in intuitive geometry, in which one arrives at a conclusion based on inferences, the pieces in Clarke's ubiquitous thunder demands our intuition to be as ripe as breadfruit about to burst. Clarke is urging viewers to trust that you know what you already know. And so that is part from a larger essay. And I will end by one last slide. Why is it not showing up here? This again is a picture of me in his museum house. And this is where you can get some information. And that is, I will stop sharing slide. So that is it. We are out of time. Amina is supposed to begin, but I wonder if they would permit to see if there's one or two questions. Amina, I know you will allow me to do that, darling, and we will make sure you have time at the end. Are there any questions or comments for any of the panelists, or anything anyone wants to say? Daisy's daughter is here. Do you want to say something quickly? If so, unmute and we will go forth. All right, so, there are things in the chat, and maybe we'll have a chance to do that. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Carol Boyce Davies. I want to thank Selvin Kudger. I want to thank Attila Springer, Hutton, and everyone for being here. Mostly, though, I want to thank Attila for setting the right pace in terms of pouring Warbage, and always had to bring vodka for Leroy when I visited him. So pour in some white rum for Leroy's spirit and for all of the ancestors who have passed us, many of whom have been named before. Thank you all, and we will go to the next panel. Miss Amina, sister, you're in the house.
I'm in the house.
Well,
I'm in the house with the help of the ancestors, because I had to leave my own space. Flo wouldn't permit us to do anything. So I, in fact, left my space and came down to the Edna Manley College, where I know I can always call on the IT people whom I've called on to hold my hand in case I have a problem. So in that breath, I'm apologizing for my beloved son, Neto. We're having serious internet challenges, and rather than not have any of us, I just ran away and left him. Professor Hutton, I know you are disappointed, and so is he. But
Amina, I was asked to introduce you, and so I want to do that. And not that you need any introduction, but still, just very briefly, Amina Blackswood Meeks is an award-winning actress, writer, and storyteller. She's also the founder and artistic director of Nkuma, the Storytelling Foundation of Jamaica. And she has a wonderful children's book that was launched, was it this year or last year?
One year ago. 1 year ago.
1 year ago. That came out 1 year ago. And then Neto Meeks is a multi-talented media practitioner, writer, performance poet, social development worker, sketch artist, martial art enthusiast, and model. And then Mr. Joshua Higgins is a professional visual artist, among other things. So I want to welcome you to this amazing panel, Art as Therapy. And we know that art is an important therapy that the Jamaican schools and the Jamaican government and all practitioners need to integrate and use more effectively to heal this very sick nation. Thank you, Amina, and take it over.
God bless you, Sister Professor Opal. Congratulations, Brother Professor Clinton, on this. Boy, you just landy, man. You land with a light. Give thanks. Let me say good evening, good evening, good evening, to everyone. I am delighted to see you, Joshua, and I am particularly delighted to see Professor Carol Boyce Davis, who said wonderful things to me on my interview panel for my PhD exam that I carry in my heart. So thank you very much. It would be remiss of me not to begin with a couple of seconds of silence to acknowledge the 400 warriors who were brutalized between the 14th of October. Has that been done already? And as far as we know, up until the 24th. And when we look at the list of those that they accounted for, we see that there were also man unnamed, woman unnamed, boy unnamed. But we have reasons to believe it was more than 400 because 1,000 houses were burnt to the ground. And if we are to believe the Institute of Statistics, that in today's Jamaica, one household averages 4 people, then that was at least another 4,000 more who were scattered and dispersed. So please allow me a couple seconds to acknowledge the shoulders on which we stand and the shoulders who determined that this paper must be delivered. So get up and drive to a place, Amina. Give thanks. So this was supposed to be a lecture demonstration, and Netta was supposed to be here playing his keyboards, but he's here in spirit. I figure I have between 20 minutes and half an hour. That's what I gauged. If I go over, Sister Opal, I know you will bring me to my right about, as they say in Antigua. October is observed as Disabilities Month in Jamaica. And maybe that marks the beginning of a challenge that we have. That challenge reflects itself in the shifting set of terminologies which reveal not just an uncertainty of how to understand the very term disability, but how to treat with persons whom we so classified. We are all familiar with tales of the less than human treatment. I didn't mean humane, I meant human treatment of persons in these various categories. Sometimes when we say humane, we mean that we don't treat animals well. No, I mean human. And we need not recount the examples of these here, because all of us know at least one. What we do know, according to available statistics, is that in 2001, and I'm sorry I couldn't find anything more recent, it perhaps exists and I didn't know where to look. But in 2001, just over 6% of the population in Jamaica identified as living with a disability according to census data. That phrase, identified as living with, I need to do some research on, because I don't know if they meant that they were identified as or if they identified themselves. At the Edna Manley College, which has recently begun to take in persons who are hearing impaired, when we ask them how you want to be described, some of them say I'm hearing impaired, and some of them say I'm deaf. Don't preach it up, I'm deaf. So there might be something that we need to unpack in this identified as, but that's how I took it out of the available data. So that 6% is over 160,000 Jamaicans, if my maths is correct. Of these individuals, however, fewer than 1% are in paid employment. making the disabled community, however we understand the term disabled, one of the most vulnerable groups in Jamaica. For now, I ask you to accept with me the loose description that disability covers a range of physical, mental, and psychological, and I'm making up a word now, differentness, which the society has yet to find a way to transform into inclusion for the collective good. And here is the rub. And yet we live in a society where the resources necessary for healing and health are all around us and perhaps go a-begging in the cultural and creative industries. New theories and research findings on the positive influence of music and art on health I found in an article in a journal called Arts and Health, which is described as an international journal for research policy and practice, volume 1, 2009, issue 1. So this international journal, Arts and Health, dedicated a significant section of that volume to a review about the latest theories of the underlying mechanisms that explain why music and art promote health and have positive influences on the course of illness. I paused there and laughed because it also had a separate section about music and art for healing and health with aging. So I need to go back and look at that one, right? It was also about the latest findings demonstrating the positive effects that music and the arts in general have on health. Jamaica not only churns out maestros in the fields of art and music without even trying, but it has the honor of having Kingston as a UNESCO designated city of music and reggae music inscribed as World Heritage. In recent times, we have astounded ourselves with the work of Kingston creatives in the use of art in the transformation and reclamation of downtown Kingston. Before that, of course, some of us were in awe at the impact of the murals in Fleet Street on the lives and spirit of the people in that community, causing them to launch what they call a life yard project in opposition to and resistance of the dead yard, with all its meanings and implications that the community had either become or was in danger of becoming in this atmosphere of economic and social injustice. In spite of these and other manifestations, however, there appears to be a societal unwillingness to value the arts in general above their entertainment or icebreaker value, opting instead to remain doubtful and dismissive of even positive reported findings. Them say it anecdotal. Okay, so the persistent treatment of cultural expressions as entertainment not only inhibits the practical recognition of their centrality to collective well-being, but prohibits their inclusion as tools for enhancing personal productivity. The time is right. This opportunity is a great one for confronting the marginalization of individuals to whom have been attached a range of labels emphasizing their disabilities to the exclusion of the gifts they possess and their capacity to use those gifts to participate in national activities and using those gifts for the collective benefit. Before we can leverage our rich cultural heritage for economic development, we must acknowledge it as source and resource for the personal development on which national economic success depends. This presentation may be regarded as a case study of what is possible for personal productivity and national development if we were to harness the power of the arts to help us redefine terms such as disability and re-engineer our understanding of how we build the productive capacity of each individual for the benefit of themselves, their communities, and the nation. Imagine, if you will, a 35-year-old broadcaster, performance poet, martial arts practitioner, I'm being modest, I should say third-degree black belt, experiencing what turned out to be described by his doctor as a massive stroke. Ironically, while going through his exercise routine based on the martial arts on the 4th of May in 2011. So we are not medical doctors, but it might help to just summarize our understanding of that event. It was categorized as Broca's aphasia. So there are two parts of the brain that could be affected by a stroke. One is Wernicke's, and thank God that's not what we had, and the other is Broca's aphasia. This results from damage to a part of the brain called the Broca's area, which is located in the frontal lobe, usually on the left side. It's one of the parts of the brain responsible for speech and for motor movement. In other words, the very things which are the primary tools of a performance artist and martial arts practitioner. We will avoid all other references to how the brain functions and whether artists are right brain or left brain, although we have come to find out during the journey that the left brain, because of its logical, analytical attributes, directs our ability to draw, right, Joshua? While even as we accept that other artistic functions lead to the notion of some of us being described as right brain dominant. So that leads me to conclude that artists need the whole of them brain. Almost from day one, we, Neto and I, started to keep a journal. Certainly from day one. The first non-medical intervention was Reiki. We are both Reiki practitioners. I a level 2 and my son Neto a level 1. So for those of you who don't know what Reiki is, it is a healing technique based on the principle that the therapist can channel energy into the patient by means of touch to activate the natural healing processes of the patient's body and restore physical and emotional well-being. But you don't have to be physically present to do a physical touch. So before you bawl out obia, which might not be a bad thing, you might want to consider some of the reputed impact of music on the body, and you might want to observe similarities in its power. That is the power of music to provide a total workout for the brain, while at the same time reducing anxiety. So we called upon the Reiki community. We call up the whole of them and say, look here, this thing happened to Neto. And Reiki practitioners believe that the first intervention after a stroke should be by Reiki. So we call up all of them. While at his bedside during the hospital stay, I would notice that he demonstrated heightened awareness at the times when I would sing for him or read for him from a book of Nigerian stories, which he had grown to treasure because it had been sent to us from a Nigerian relative. And in fact, he would indicate to me stories I had not yet read that he enjoyed. So I would read these stories for him. By the time we got home, I was sure that he responded more to music, and I would sing whatever I wanted to say or make up rhymes. It's a practice that was carried forward from the time he was a baby, and the neighbors used to come to the fence and listen to what song I would sing that I would say is not right. So let's go back to Broca's for a bit. Part of its manifestation is what I describe as what happens to your computer when it needs defragmenting. I don't even know if we still use that term, but that's how I understand it. It means that everything is there. It just might not be where you expect it to be. And all it needs is to be restored to its right location. So sometimes I would be talking to Neto and he would put his hand to his ear and he would say, I see you. And I would have to say, no, you mean you hear me. Everything was there. It just had to come back. One night, about 3 months into this insult to the brain, I love that term. It's what some medical practitioners use, and some of his therapists refuse to call it anything else. I heard him stumbling around in his room. When I investigated, he indicated to me that he was hearing a sound, which was quite disturbing. I knew what it was, but I was unable to explain. I remembered, however, that many years before that, pre-stroke, he had awoken me at about 2 o'clock in the morning, extremely remorseful that he had killed a dragonfly. He had written a poem apologizing to the dragonfly and wanted me to hear it. Of course, me say, then it couldn't wait till morning, Neto. But in the poem, he described how he had been awakened by this noise in the ceiling above his head. And in the dark, his only thought was that whatever it was, he was going to kill it. So he used a shirt in rapid swirling motion. And when he could no longer hear the sound, he turned on the light. To his horror, he saw this beautiful creature, wings glistening, red, gold, and green, lying on the floor. And in the poem he wrote, it was then I knew you and I dig the same scene. Soldiers in their red, gold, and green come to fight Babylon. You're a dragon slayer, a mosquito killer, just like the eye. I did not know that I knew the poem. I have never tried to say it again. But in that moment, watching him so terrified of a sound he could not explain, the poem tumbled out of me. By the time I got to red, gold, and green, he had relaxed and was joining in, grinning, laughing at himself really, and saying, oh, a mosquito. In that moment, I knew how we were going to be using poetry. I read poetry to him every evening, and in the days, I mounted displays of poetry books on his bed, even although we knew that he could not yet read. He had not yet learned again to read. But he recognized the journals he used to enjoy, and the books by Easton Lee, and the pictures of Claude McKay and Mikey Smith, and so on. And then one day I went to CPTC and requested copies of any programs they had with Neto performing. Some nights I had to beg him to go to your bed. He wouldn't stop watch them. One morning he told me that he had a dream about one of my friends. He had to describe this friend, of course, because he couldn't find his name. This friend was tall. He signaled that. He made other gestures I did not understand. But when he used his hand to shape out the eyeglasses and covered his eyes so I would understand that the glasses were dark, there was no doubt that Peter Tosh had visited him that night. I believe that I am the greatest Peter Tosh fan in the world. That aside, whatever conversations he had had with Peter, we now added music to the poetry. Sometimes me ears want to eat grass, Neto, but he was playing and singing along to every Peter Tosh, Bonnie, Bob, Jimmy. I would then supply him with every newspaper article about Jamaican music and musicians. Sometimes I had not read them myself, and he would summarize for me before I knew that he was again teaching himself to read. He would summarize for me what the article was about. Gradually, it was I who was asking him to tell me about this or that latest singing sensation, because I am not at home to listen to the music, or to remind me about this or that song by an established singer. By the time Rasta Kura, a member of the poetry collective Royal African Soldiers, in which Netta used to perform, was launching his poetry festival, they, the Royal African Soldiers, informed me that Netta was going to perform. Me go runway now because I don't know if this is possible. Can I just tell you, I went to the festival and I could not watch. Jackie Amber Cohen watched and kept saying to me, Amina, come look, him all right. But they had assigned him all the musical bridges in their group performance. He never missed a beat. He was note perfect. He was later to return to the stage at Calabash, where he had performed in the opening ceremony at the first Calabash and in all the iterations until May 2011. When we would go driving around Kingston, he would often treat familiar locations as if they were brand new, first time encounter. One day we were traveling down Red Hills Road. For those of you who know Red Hills Road, you pass Calabar High School and you're now going under the bridge. And as we were going under the bridge, he said, Capleton. So you go under the bridge and you're approaching Kasha Park. And then he started to give me instructions, turn here, turn there. And true enough, we ended up at Capleton's house. So after that, our outings became driving past musical landmarks. The last place him had a conversation with Junior Reid. The last place Junior Reid gave a concert. The murals of the Big Ship Crew and other singers on Lyndhurst Road. And after every trip of this nature, he would have the same refrain, I want to work. The element of restoring mobility to the hand led to the introduction of drawing books and crayons to amazing results. Netta would create superheroes or represent figures such as Bob and Garvey as superheroes. Them a fly, you know, them a do all kind of superhuman something. And then we added the keyboard accidentally. I was looking for gadgets that would force the weak hand to work. And someone recommended the keyboard because of the function of music to rewire the brain. And that's a whole nother part of the story. My left brain took over and I would pester the music teacher with, so what is your timetable? When should I see results? Well, him no know neither. He had never had an assignment like this. He had never used music for this kind of therapy. He was just teaching skills. So he was very patient with me and asked me to wait. When I started to hear Jamaican folk songs and redemption song from Bob Marley wafting into my dreams as I tried to sleep at night, I get up like a copycat who have to be in it, the egg who are in the red, and registered for classes with this music teacher and bought myself a keyboard. It was then that I understood what Neto had achieved. Gentle people, if any of you ever try to learn to play the keyboard, trust me, it's not easy. Playing with one hand, with the weak hand now spontaneously wanting to join in. So for a while, he was just using the good hand, the left hand. He's right-handed. But the more he played with the right hand by his side, the more the right hand would jump up and try to mirror the other side, because you know you play with two hands. Okay.
You've gone 20 minutes, just to let you know.
All right, me soon finish. Me can finish. And
Yes.
always I want to work became a more frequent refrain. Let's jump to 2020. By this time, he's getting fairly independent, and his cousins in Florida say, make Neto come spend some time. So he traveled in February, and you know what happened right after that. COVID locked we down. So I am worried now. My child was only supposed to be gone for 4 weeks. When am I gonna come back? So me now turn a mother hen. Every day me a call, him cousin a tell me, auntie, don't worry man, we'll have conversation. Conversation about what? Music and art. Till Netta start to leave voice notes on my phone now and WhatsApp me his drawings of Selassie, Marcus, and a host of other superheroes. By the time he came back to Jamaica at the end of May, when the first flight did leave Florida, his vocabulary was almost doubled. But always, I want to work. It's skipping out some things to say, it is at the level of his spiritual contentment that I am perhaps most astounded. It is an unrecognized end product of the already marginalized treatment of the arts for every malady, including the malady of presumed normal or able-bodied people. Using Netta's journey, we recently launched the Art and Soul Netta Meeks Foundation. Its core aim is to demonstrate the power of the arts for creating wholeness. Skipping down to something I want to say. La 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 la. Studies show creative expression helps maintain our immune systems, and that art is clinically proven to reduce stress, elevate mood, and lower blood pressure. And then I want to make some recommendations. Through the journey of Netta, we recognize that there exists an opportunity for health educators to move towards models of health promotion that more fully appreciate the interconnectedness of the various dimensions of health, but which also practically appreciate the vast resources in this cultural mecca for promoting spiritual health as an important dimension of social and emotional health, which in turn provide motivation for health behavior changes that determine physical and intellectual health. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amina, for this amazing journey, and how you're using art that has really helped. And I too do a little Reiki, so I'm glad to hear all of those modalities have been employed. Let's go now to Joshua Higgins, and then we can have some conversations.
Hello.
Hello.
Everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Amika, Amina, good seeing you.
Yes. You too.
It's a long time.
Yes.
Clinton Hutton. Good, my brother. Sister Amina, you've touched on a very, very sensitive topic, because my mom died from a stroke. So let me just say that up front. Let me thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of this conference as a Jamaican studio artist. I'm grateful for the virtual opportunity to interact with the Caribbean Arts, Aesthetics, and Education Conference. Again, number 2 on my program here. As a fellow Caribbean artist, I'd like to recognize the tremendous contribution of the Trinidadian artist, Leroy Clark. I was so excited to hear so much more about him, right? At this time, I think my time is a little bit limited, but I'm invited to talk about the art as a profession. And art is good medicine. That's what it is, good medicine. Right? You can use art in just about any medium. Art is about life. This is what we live, earn, and our being is transported through that. I have 3 topics that I want to talk about, just basically. You can run the slides while we're talking. How I became an artist, that's one topic. How I survive as an artist, and why I'm an artist. Now, I grew up in an environment that my mother was a real creative in the house, but she was also the Minister of Finance. And at a very, very early age in my life, she saw my artistic interest and encouraged me. And she said, let me tell you something, son. I don't want it to be no other profession or do anything else in life other than being an artist. And I hope you promise me that. Okay, so Yam went off to art school, but before art school, she encouraged me to go and do a course in business. Somehow I didn't get the connection, but later on in life, it came around. And I went to Durham College, which was down on Camp Road, to learn a little bit about accounts and the rest of it. That was just 2 or 3 months there, and that was it. At the end of my first year at the Jamaica School of Art, and that's where I went to school, Jamaica School of Art. Jamaica School of Art used to be down on North Street and Duke Street at the crossing where Jamintel was at the time. At my first year, I took home my coursework, including figurative drawings and just about anything that I've done for the first year in art school. And I carefully filed them away under my bed in my room. And, my mother, the creative, she have her own sewing room and everything. And one day I heard my mother shout out to the helper, which is Ruby, bless her soul. Ruby, come here. In a Jesus name. Look and see what me I spend my money upon. The boy I draw a naked woman. So I said, boops, my career gone. That's the end of me. And then my mother never said anything. She apparently refiled my artwork and placed it back on the bed. She came over and just passed me. Boy, I draw a naked woman, pornography, pass. And the following year, school term, I was now rewarded with a room, a full room, half of the side of the house in Kingston, and full monetary value to go to school. And that was just, my mother never spoke about it. She just never engaged me as to why I was at art school drawing figurative studies under the tutelage of Valerie Bloomfield or just about anybody else who was teaching at the time. And that was just a challenge. It was a beautiful experience to have been at the art school at that time, because at that time you were working with studio artists who would have come to school and shared their time as professionals and would have mentored, a lot of us. This was between 1974 and 1978. Music was hot.
Excuse me, you want the slides to be going, right? Can whoever operating the slides keep them moving? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you. And during the 1970s was a high level of creativity. Music was hot on the box. Reggae was on top. And so it was an environment, a cultural environment of pregnant with a lot of things around you as an artist. Okay. And that sustained me. At the time you had a dub poet like Michael Smith, I can remember. You'd hear Marley and the Wailers and just about everybody else back in those days. And that sustenance took me up to this point. I'll just move to the next point quickly. How you survive as an artist. In an art setting, an art school, you have your planners, your principal, your lecturers, your models, your studio, your materials are being provided for you based on your parents. But after you leave an art institution, there is no more studio, no more person advising you or telling you what to do or anything like that. You leave that institution, and in those days, you either go to a teaching situation where you become a teacher, or you switch profession, okay? So I realized from very early that mentorship is critical in this business. And the mentorship is important because just about everyone around you, you're able to own and develop your unique style after a while. So you're looking at different styles and different artists and different people around you. And quickly you recognize that art is a business. So on the other side of it, you have to come to terms where you surround yourself with people who believe in your vision as an artist. That's part of the survival of becoming an artist. You have to surround yourself with people who believe in your vision. And it comes from collectors, lovers, wives, anybody, people who believe in your vision as an artist, okay? The next thing you recognize very early as an artist is that creativity and poverty don't work. Let me repeat, creativity and poverty don't work, right? An artist is a wealth creator, right? Each work is valuable. And so therefore in our communities and in our murals on the streets or in our corporate offices and the rest of it, we have to start revaluing what we have. We are not a part of the international scene in terms of bringing our art abroad and is able to bring the art back to Jamaica without our custom system interfering with it. And as a professional artist, artists have been practicing for over 40 years. I have encountered that many times. We need to change the laws around that, because when I take my works anywhere else in the world, they would look and said, "Is this your work?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Welcome, beautiful works. Take your works back to Jamaica." It's possible that the Jamaican customs could detain your works. We need to get out of that. So let me repeat. An artist is a wealth creator. A work of art is like a bearer's instrument. And we should be able to interact a little bit more in the Caribbean. We should be able to interact in the global space, right, as artists, okay? Because this is the way we'll be able to show our visual creation much more. Now, if you look at it, and I'm talking about the economics of art, findings from the Art Basel, a survey show that the high net worth individuals say the pandemic has increased the interest in collecting art. This is from the Art Basel, Arts Economics, okay? So even though the pandemic is still with us, and still a major concern, last year, the art antiquities reached $50.1 billion. We are not a part of that. While the online sales doubled in value, and we are not a part of that, okay? So I encourage artists also to look at other mediums. So since that we're not a part of that, but we can be a part of it in the Caribbean and locally around our friends and families and companies and individuals, we should look at art printing as another medium to make your monies, to be able to maintain your studio or your art interests, right? Gone are the days when we have collectors that were big supporters of the arts. We need to re-engage such persons and companies and banks and the rest of it, re-engage them to be a part of it. How I survive as an artist, I have special thanks to a few artists who have passed, and special thanks to the following people who no longer with us, but has been mentors to me as an artist, where their doors are always open and I could always walk in and talk to them, and they give me good advice. And I'll just call a few names, Jamaican artists: Barrington Watson, Alex Cooper, Albert Huey, Joe James, right? Gonzalez, Gene Pearson. These were some of the foundation persons that have created Joshua Higgins today, right? They lectured me at some point, and I remember a keen story is that after I left art school, feeling a little bit, good about myself and the rest of it, Barry Watson, who was one of the assessors, singled me out and he said, "Look, I want to show you a thing or two." And Barry, the great artist and the guy who everybody afraid of, you know, when you assess it, you come, everybody like, wow, Barry's coming and he's the guy who can fail you. Well, anyway, he gave me an opportunity. And I said, come to my studio in Orange Park, because you're half big. You don't ready yet. And I was a little bit insulted by that. But that was one of the greatest lessons that I've learned as an artist. He took me, he gave me an exercise to do a drawing of the wrestlers. And here's where the turning point of becoming an artist. And he said, draw that. And I spent the whole day and wasn't able to connect the dots. And Barry came over, Barrington Watson came over with simple lines, big shape, big movement, and then the subordinate shapes. That's making the connection. And I've used that as a method in my life and a method to approaching many things in my life. The big shape, the big movements, and then the subordinate shapes. And that was lesson one. And the rest of it was history. It's history between Barry and myself. You have to be professional at all levels in your career. This profession is not about certification, right? Certification cannot help you being an artist. It's about building relationships and working hard, constantly working. The process is working. So you can't go and say you get a PhD or you get a master's or a diploma or a certificate, and then you're an artist. This is a lifestyle. This is something that you do almost every day. This is part of your existence. So everything you look at is a flavor for art. The forms, the landscapes, the energy around you is about art. And talk about wellness in art. And I heard Sister Amina mention that. Art is about, when I go to my studio, no matter what is happening, any time of the day, any time of the night, when I go to my studio, and once I pick up that brush, I don't remember the minutes anymore. So I don't know if it's my left brain really kicked in, as Dr. Amina said. But you get to a point where once that left side of your head kicked in, that's it. I don't remember hours, I don't remember days, I don't remember weeks, I don't remember to eat sometimes, because you're so much in single focus in what you're doing, right? And as a result of that, I'm happy being an artist. I've made a reasonable life around it. And that's what I do every day, professionally. Why I'm still an artist? Well, Amina touched on a very sensitive subject to me, which is about a stroke. My mother used to accompany me to the Kaiser Art Cup competition every year. And at that competition, we have artists from amateur, professionals, and student artists from St. Mary, St. Anne, Trelawney, to enter this competition every year. And each year, she would accompany me. And each time, I never won a prize. But she said one year to me, you will win, you know? In the December of 1978, when I graduated from our school, that same year, my mother was hospitalized. As a matter of fact, the same night of the exhibition, she was hospitalized. So I went and I visited her in the hospital, and I stayed with her. She had a stroke. And I had to leave her. So I went over to I was passing, and I went over to the exhibition, and Barry Watson, who was the main guest speaker at the exhibition, while I was walking in, said, "Here comes the artist, Joshua Higgins. You're the first prize winner in 1978 of the Kaiser Cup. Welcome." So I walk up, Barry shook my hand, the guests and the panel shook my hands, and I'll take a photo up and everything. And just for about a few minutes after that, I grabbed the cup and I took a bus back to St. Anne's Bay Hospital. And upon arrival, she was not there. And I made a promise that I'll continue. That has been my life up to this point. It was very significant because I could have gone, she could have sent me to law school or any other institution. But that kept me single focus. And I have to give thanks to all my wives, all my friends, all my people who have loved me and lovers who have kept me single focus. And I'm a very, very lucky man to have been here. My art sits in the institutions, whether it's Jamaica or where, they're collected all over, and people still maintain confidence in my work, which is very important. You become a brand. So ladies and gentlemen, this is why I'm an artist. Probably it's the first time I'm saying this to a lot of folks, but this is why I'm an artist. That drive, every day you get up and you go after that one drive to prove that you can do it. I would like to say special thanks to my brother, Professor Clinton Hutton, for inviting me to speak with you today. Thanks very much. And that's the end of it for now. Thank you very much, and thank the panel very, very much for that.
Josh, I want to just thank you for sharing so fully and so openly. And I think all of us can identify with that loss and how that, in a sense, your mother gifting you and granting you permission to continue has led you to be steadfast on your path, and all of us are blessed for it.
Thank you.
There's a lot that both you and Amina discussed, and I really like what you said about creativity and poverty don't work,
yeah.
And artist is a wealth creation. And certainly I don't think Minister Grange is on, but the idea that you have to take your work out and when it comes back, the customer wants to charge you, that definitely should not be allowed.
We need to change that.
Yeah, so that's something we need to act on. So I would like to engage you and Amina in a conversation, in a sense, because, you know, she's talking about Neto and the healing that happened through music primarily. And then she started off by talking about students that are now accepted, whether they're deaf or hearing impaired, whatever definition or terminology that they want to use. But I think both of you, the intersection between both of you is that not only is art wealth creation and, you know, need the space and the time for that to happen, but there's an element of healing and sovereignty that you both speak about. And I just want to open it up maybe for, I don't know if Amina has something she wants to say to you in addition to what he said in the chat that, you know, thanks for just being there. Or other people might have questions. So I will feel, you know, both. Amina?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a storyteller, so I could chat forever. But But I've grown to describe Neto as my Milo kid. My Milo kid. You know, no free ad, but Milo, the food drink of champions. That prior to the stroke, ironically, when Tony Lang had his stroke, for those of us who know Tony Lang and remember Tony Lang, our broadcaster, our cultural activist and so on, who used to be at that radio station, no free ad. When Tony had his stroke, here I mean, me now have no stroke. Come here, go learn to walk like my son. 1, 2. He is unhurried. Unhurried. Fire come, flood come. He is unhurried. And so I learned that about the misconception that we have, that it is people who are high strung, who get strokes and these things. I learned that. And as cool and calm as Neto was pre-stroke, I didn't know he could reach another level of cool and calm. No dissatisfaction, no blaming nobody. And the more he accomplishes, is the more mellow he gets. And of course, I attribute that to the music. He also added, what the other one named Tai Chi. He also added Tai Chi, which is itself another art form which just mellows you and nothing in the world bothers you. Let me say very quickly that we discovered a woman called Jill Bolte Taylor. 2 things we heard in the hospital the day of the stroke, or them hear it, because I wasn't hearing nothing. And as them hear it, them tell me, that is him friend and my cousin and my sister and so on. We heard massive stroke, which I ignored. Didn't know what that meant until 6 months later. But I also heard strokes in the young. And right away, through me as a mad woman, me disconnect from them, get on my laptop and look up day 1 of the stroke, strokes in the young. And this lady came up, Jill Bolte Taylor. She is a brain anatomist, not a brain surgeon. And at age 27, she had a stroke. And she described something which, as an artist, I understand. Her head, her left side telling her one thing, and her right side telling her one thing. And in the end, she said she came out in a state of nirvana. That she almost feel like this is what it does to you. To understand what your spirit and your body can do, you come out in a state of nirvana that makes you know that you can change the world without fuss or rancor. And I see that in my Milo kid. And through his experience, I think I have grown. Me not reach this yet. But I am understanding what it means to be an activist without all of the noise that we make. That's important for me to share, because it's been amazing for me to watch it. It's been amazing for me to see me say, Neto, what kind of friend that? How then do so and so and so and so? And he would say, I know, but he's my brother. And I have to say, shame on you, I mean. Shame on you. So it's a whole, when I say that the spiritual dimension has been the most amazing part of it for me, that's part of what I mean. And when you talk about the use of the arts in all its form for healing the sickness in the society. That is so true. Including artists who are sick. Because there are some artists who do some sick things, who make you remember Ben Okri. And Ben Okri said, a nation is as sick as its storytellers, because we can tell ourselves sick stories. And some of our artists tell themselves and tell us sick stories. So it's not just that we're saying any art. It's whether you understand the responsibility of the artist to uplift, and whether you can see that in your own life, which has been so amazing for me to watch.
So our artistic.
Go ahead.
No, that's why artistic wellness is very important to our development as a country. Just cutting one blade of grass around can change a community. Right? I proposed some time back to the government and write in my writings about looking at the visual aspects of Kingston, changing the dynamics about the things that we see around Kingston. Kingston is still lacking in visual energy, visual wealth. We're lacking in that department. So it's not just to revalue the dollar or to deal with crime. We need another form of wellness in our society, in the forms of mural, in the forms of architecture. You look at the architecture around Kingston, and that tells you a lot about us. So any country you visit and you listen to music and you look at the arts and then have the food, it tells you a real story about the country. And we need, as a policy, to start looking at the development of artistic wellness in this country. Because as Amina said, it's good for your spirit, it's good for your soul, and the rest of it. And even the music that we used to listen in the 1970s really brought wellness to our soul in many forms, even to this day.
Yes, thanks for that. And I wonder though, not that I want to change the subject, because I definitely think Kingston needs more mural and art and green space.
Yes.
Definitely green space, because that's also part of the art, the nature artistic imposition. But I wondered though, if you could just talk a little bit about, you're saying that artists have to move from just a singular canvas, so you showed doing prints in terms of developing a kind of business attitude and for longevity. So can you talk a little bit more about that, your own intervention into that foray, and how artists, you can, what kind of advice or suggestions you might want to give to emerging artists about looking at how they can multiply or duplicate their product?
Right, okay. Well, one of the ways to start doing it is start at the bottom. Don't look at all this big monies around. And I can tell you many stories around that, many stories around that. So I remember starting out, there was a guy by the name of Tony Chin, who started Mico Gallery and went on to open Photo Express. I don't know if anyone would remember. You remember him, Clinton? Tony Chin. And Tony Chin said to us, a group of artists, look, every week, bring me 10 paintings back in those days, and I'll pay you $10 for each one of them. So if you want to make $100, you do the math, right? And Tony Chin started us out by understanding that you bring Picasso come to me or whoever, I'm only going to give you $10. That was the training wheels on which you started as an artist, to understand the economics around not creating masterpieces. You'll get there, but to start with your $10 pieces. And after a while, you'll find that if you're consistent and if you grow your clientele, you'll move from that $10 to $20 to $100 to $200 and up and up and up you go. So it takes you a good while to create that step approach to your career. Now, prints, you can make one painting, and out of that one painting, you can multiply that one painting to in several ways. You create an original painting. Let's say you get $200 for it. But with that same original painting, you make 4 of them. How much is that? As a print, $200. So you see the multiplication of that. Mm-hmm. And I remember many years ago, I was one of those artists who went after the print market really, really big times here in Jamaica. And the galleries and the other artistic scene say I go after what they call go after the unsophisticated crowd in this country. Well, the funny thing is that unsophisticated crowd, most of them became my clients after a while, because there are folks who are working in back offices and the rest of it, and I'd sell them a print for $100. 10 years later, they would say to me, look, I need something for my house. I bought a new house and I need something. So you have to develop credibility with your clients. So you can start from a small amount and work to get to that level. After a while, my work should have gone to offices. And in those offices, people will walk in the office and say, who's that artist? And I was able to provide them with a print. So start with the people at the bottom, then you grow to the top. There's another story I can give you, There was a bill I couldn't pay to my cardiologist, Dr. Don Christian. My brother was very, very sick. And I was a teacher at that time. And I took my brother to Dr. Christian and he said, young man, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm an artist, sir. He said, boy, you can't pay my bill right here. I said, well, all right. You said you're an artist? I said, yes, sir. He said, I tell you what, bring a painting, come tomorrow morning so I can hang it up on the wall and use it as security until you can pay me, sir. I said, Jesus Christ. I went home that night and I created a painting, right? Okay, here's this big doctor, wanting money, right? Took the painting down to Dr. Christian, hung it as a wall, still dry, wet, I said, boy, Doc, this is the security. Well, that was about the Wednesday. By the Friday, he called me by telephone and said, you have another one? Because, you have high network clients at the time. And I said, yes, sir. Overnight again, you just paint another thing and carry it on. Sold. Next week, sold. After a while, I was getting several clips of people who looking for artwork. So I'm just encouraging any young artist. You don't have to approach the galleries, which, I'm kind of anti-gallery, so don't take it from me that much. But just walk, talk to people, right? Make friends with people. Develop credibility amongst these clients. And after a while, they will start seeking you out. So to get to this level simply means that you have to do a lot of legwork. I used to walk to downtown, the offices and the lawyers, then walk up to the University of the West Indies, right? To sell my works amongst lecturers and the rest of it there, right? So they're the ones who will build you as an artist. They're the ones who will make you an artist. They're the ones who tell them friends, say, look, go buy a piece of Joshua because I have one, right? So it's a long journey. But for me, it's an interesting one because on the way, I've met several folks in life. Does that answer part of one?
Yes, it does. And the people are saying, very inspirational. Washington, Rosemary and Mosa, thank you. Very inspirational. And then someone else in the chat, if I could scroll up, said, I've asked that question, why is there no art in my small community in the country? So people are really listening and resonating with that. Other questions or comment or dialogue between both of you? I actually don't know what time is this.
I like Joshua's very important comment that the notion of the starving artist is something that we have to do away with. And so the introduction of the concept of the artist as wealth creator is very important. Part of how we move what we do from the tangent to the center is the way we language ourselves. And so we're not singers or storytellers or painters. We are development workers whose tools happen to be the art that we do. And I think that once we begin to see ourselves in that way and talk about ourselves in that way, then we will facilitate moving value, not the economic value now, as important as that is, but the social value of the art, the heritage value of the art to center.
Right.
Absolutely. Clinton, I don't know if you want to come in here. We do have time. So participants, we have 55 participants or 56 I'm seeing. So there's an opportunity to have to, raise a question or a comment and to engage in dialogue. And I want to thank you, Amina, for that point that you just made about, being creators and raising the value. Yeah. And also, Joshua, for your point that, you start with the people and
Yeah.
think of your art as money, which is what it is,
Yeah.
as that doctor demonstrated and indicated to you. Yeah.
Yes, Amina, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing loud and clear.
Yes, what you have said in your presentation, I am looking at that in relation to training. Training of teachers, because the teacher should train students for, in appreciating beauty in visual expressions. Also, those who are inclined to become artists, that motivation that they can give to students in a country where, unlike Josh, in a country where if you want to be an artist, them say the boy worthless. Look where him come to. In fact, Barrington Watson actually faced that.
Yes,
Josh?
yes,
Right.
that's true. That's true. That's true.
Right?
That's true.
But what you have said, and what I know from persons like Leroy Clark was radical beyond belief. But Leroy Clark made his living from his art. That's what he did.
Right.
And he has left a legacy that is just huge. Huge.
Right.
So I'm concerned with the training of teachers in the disciplines of the arts, as well as the different things that art can do to the human spirit, right? And you have done 2 presentations which shows 2 directions that are not mutually exclusive, but are important. So that at Mico or Edna, they need to develop art programs that go beyond what art programs used to be.
Right. That's true.
That's where we need to go. The same thing with music.
Yes.
The same thing with music. I don't see any music school that should teach music and not teach dub.
Yes.
I mean, it's dub music is a Jamaican creation. Dub is the first electronic music in the world. We created that. And it shows. I mean, dub is painted with frequency, really. Right. Dub is painted with sound. Right. And artists can recognize. That's why many artists also love music. They can recognize.
Yes, that's number one.
The relationship between both.
That's number one.
And so my concern is how we develop the type of courses, the type of literature, the type of documentaries, because even if you go online now, there are numerous excellent documentaries on YouTube, for example, from serious people, professionals, people who are creators, people who study the work from the position of psychiatry, from the position of psychology, from the position of economics, from the position of marketing aesthetics, etc., etc. How do we help to bring those into the curriculum in teachers' colleges?
You just have to do it.
So that teachers can go into the classroom,
right,
where this country and the Caribbean, that's why they became global powerhouse in culture. That the level of creativity in this country and the Caribbean is enormous. Right? How and some of that type of creativity resides in the gunman.
Yes, that's true.
So Amina has to leave at 1:45.
Yes,
I want
yes.
both of these artists to really answer it from their perspective. Amina as a
Precisely.
storyteller, you
Yes.
know, and I know she has a plan and she's been doing some stuff, but just
Go
speak
ahead,
to
Amina.
us about how would you make storytelling an integral part of the curriculum? And I don't think it's a big shift that needs to happen. Amina and then Josh, you do it from the
It's
visual arts.
storytelling as context, content, and methodology. So let me shape a context. Okay, so Elaine Thompson hero is context, content, and methodology. For those people who are saying, for example, the narrative that our athletes have put us on the map, do they understand in this week, Professor Hutton, that Paul Bogle put us on the map in 1865 when he lick off the assassination of Abraham Lincoln that had occupied the news for 6 months? Lick it out of the way.
Absolutely.
So where are our stories of greatness? Where are the stories about our gods? Where do we say to our children, if both grandfather never see great-great-grandfather, never see when the gate open and run through it before them could lock it? And that is the spirit. That's what I mean about context, content, and methodology. It don't have to be separated. Allow me an example. As much as I talk about Bolt, I love Asafa Powell. And there are 2 anecdotes I can share about Asafa Powell. When I worked in the Ministry of Education, and one of my principals in one of the inner city schools said to me, the little boy, them don't respect their mother. Me say, all you have to do is to cut out the picture of Asafa Powell, hug up his mother, and gone to Pegasus to go collect him award of Sportsman of the Year. Story finish. Story finish. Because there is a hero who they admire, so that's content, context, and methodology. And then I was told by the Carteret principal at the time that the grades 7, 8, and 9 boys didn't like maths. Me going back to Asafa Powell, you know, because now we give them a list of all the places Asafa had been in a certain period of time, and gave them a list of all of his times and say, find the average. And the little boy them who couldn't do maths, find the average. Because them not doing maths. Them not doing maths. Them doing pride. Them want to know where Asafa eat. Them want to know what that place that him been to look like. Them want to know how much it costs if them can go there. That's context, content, and methodology. And we can have all of that in storytelling. I have a project for children called Amina's Blanket, where I tell them a story, and we know the 5 elements of language acquisition. One of them is how you understand, and another is how you retell. Some of them can't retell, but them can draw. So we give them a piece of calico and some paint, and them draw how them understand the story, and then them stitch all them pieces of calico together, and them a make quilt, patchwork, blanket. So it's all integrated, and you and I know, of course, Professor Sister Palmer Adisa, that on the continent there is no one word that means storytelling, at least not that I've been able to find. It's where all the arts meet, the song and the dance and the everything mix up in a one. And the word that I always remember is the one from Nigeria, Pataki, Pataki, which describes this coming together of all the arts that you and I call storytelling as a narrative intended for your spiritual upbringing. Professor Hutton, I want to come down to your school, come do some storytelling courses, because it depends on who is in the chair. And in a real way, we have to become Marcus Garvey. When Garvey look round and asks about, say, where then is the black man king? Him not see none. I'm paraphrasing him now. And he must have said to himself, well, you see like how me ask the question, and me are the answer. And me are the answer. And we must never underestimate where we are placed at any given point in time to move an agenda forward.
That is exactly what Leroy Clark said. That's exactly what Leroy Clark said. Exactly.
Ashe, thank you so much for always teaching, for always storytelling, and for letting us understand how integral, essential, and necessary, and how much a part of who we are storytelling is. Thank you so much for your contribution, for keeping stories alive in Jamaica, and making sure that it continues. Thank you. Josh, your last word?
Yes, to Sister Amina again, thanks very much about context, content, and methodology. We as Black people, let's not go around the corner here. We need to start reimagining ourselves, right? Through our own images, okay? Because we need that image to identify with. And back to the athletes, every Jamaican is proud because of a Jamaican. So whether it's from from Brazil right up to Cuba or the rest of it, we need to start creating our own images. Because with that, we can identify ourselves. I'm seeing right now we're losing ourselves through other images. So this is a way to bring context, content, and methodology. Go back to the whole business of schooling. When I entered the art school back in 1974, we had professional artists who was working in the school. Osman Watson, all those guys would come and give you their context, content, and methodology. Methodology in terms of style. Mm-hmm. And I remember Osman Watson with very much so African retention in his work. And I remember that. So we have to start reimagining ourselves around these issues, but it starts with our colleges. We have gone to a position in this country where we have taken the creativity out and have gone to a level of certification, mm-hmm. a high level of certification. So we have people who are in a situation where they move from one institution to the next, never ever use a pencil or know what a sheet of paper looks like. We need to change that. We need to identify talent, and we need to encourage the talent. We need to embrace the talent. Look at, I mean, we go back. We have a beautiful storyteller, Amina, but do we have the illustrators to back up all our stories? Okay. Where are illustrators? And if you want to operate as an artist, even on a similar level like Joshua Higgins, there's no institution in this country that will help you to develop as an artist. There's not one, no financial, no nothing in this country that will help you to develop and encourage your craft. So if you want to have, let's say, a digital Wacom or whatever it is, it's very expensive. We need to encourage so that we can show our own images. We can identify ourselves through what we see on the wall and not what is imported in this country or imported globally on the network or so. We need to compete with that. Okay. And
I want to respond to a comment in the chat because it's relevant to what we're talking about. And certainly I believe we're at a crisis in terms of identity. And I'm thinking about Rex McLeod and his book about
right.
So the question is, how do we move from creative talk to policy and legislation in favor of the arts, touching the attitude of parents, teachers, and lecturers who openly reject art education? Is silence making an impact? So that's really what you've all been saying. Right. Clinton said it, Amina says it, that we need to change the education system. Yes. And Josh, you said it about, bringing in art. So we do need to have policies and legislation, all of which connect to who we are and how we see ourselves and how we reflect ourselves to the larger society. Right. Anybody want to take that on?
Yes, the absence of policies and legislations does not mean that we can't do. It really is a chicken or the egg, and sometimes we have to do everything at once. So when our children open a book, when our teachers are taught in teacher training institutions that this particular module must teach our children about statesmen, and they open the book and they see a non-Caribbean, non-African name, what is to stop them from adding a statesman such as Marcus Garvey?
Right.
Nothing.
But they have to see him as a statesman, Amina.
This is the point I am making, that when we get them in front of us to train them, then we shift their head space and how they think. And eventually, we put up a big poster with our leaders, I run back away, and the poster mark, there they go, and I must hurry after, because behold, I am their leader. But if we keep on and wait for them to lead, then there are some things that will not change. So what is it that we do every time we face a teacher in training, or a student that make them go, you mean Marcus Garvey was a statesman? Exactly. Marcus Garvey did write hymns and poems. Me never did know say Claude McKay was part of the Renaissance. We can just drop a word that get them thinking, until we come to the point where we say, okay, time to write up the policy, by which time the policy is already being implemented.
Both of you people want to know if there's contact information to reach you, and if so, could you just put it in the general chat if you have a public contact information for people who want to find that out.
That beautiful word that you said, Tukuma, that Jamaicans call brother Tukuma, is really the name of Anansi's firstborn child, who in the folklore named Big Head, not because of the size I'm head, but because of the wisdom in it. And that's where to find me at nkuma_ja@yahoo.com.
And I'm also putting in my thing for Interviewing the Caribbean, for which I'm the editor-in-chief.
And should I?
Yes, Josh, if you have a contact, public contact, you should share that. And Clinton, if you also have a public contact, you should share that in the general to everyone, so that people can have that.
Okay, I'm Josh.
Sorry, I just give thanks, Marvin. I see your comment, Marvin George. Give thanks.
Yes, my contact is joshstudiovisual@gmail.com. joshstudiovisual@gmail.com.
Harka, TARHARKA.
You guys can just type it in the chat for people who might not hear. It would be good. And I really appreciate what Marvin says. It always has to be subversion. That's where we start. That's the only way we survive. You have to be subversive in a system that persists in this kind of colonial paradigm. And until the shift, as Amina says, you drop it in until the shift happens. But I think simultaneously we have to make the shift happen, because how many of us are in those spaces where we can drop it in so that the change is not trickle down, and we know it starts there, but there can be more impacting.
Thank you.
In the absence of registration, there was no remind. I don't. Somebody say, someone, and Clinton, maybe you could respond to that. When will the proceedings of the conference be available? That came up in the chat.
We'll talk to our group first.
And I want to encourage people to join tomorrow. That tomorrow a wonderful lineup is there. And whereas today the focus was on visuals, the visual art, as others, tomorrow, we're going to be focusing on the literature, and there's a lot of wonderful things lined up. I'm scrolling through the program so that I can, or maybe Dr. Dunkley will come in and just at this point talk about tomorrow. And invite people to join. But I do want to invite you to come back tomorrow and the day after to hear. There's a wonderful thing on Jean Benta Breeze, sister poet who died recently. and connecting it to music. In the chat, there is a conference Zoom and all of that. So there is
We'll
a lot.
have a version on YouTube.
And there's a version on YouTube.
We will,
so
yeah.
there you have it.
Mhm.
So tomorrow, same time, same place. We start at 10, and from 10 to 11:30, Professor Carolyn Cooper will chair the panel, Literatures in the Arts, and there will be Owen Blacker Ellis, who will also be part of that, and they'll be looking at Jean Benter Breeze. Then from 11:30 to 1 o'clock, there's another presentation. Mrs. Sheehan Jose, Head of Aesthetics Department of the Mico University College, and there'll be iTunes Springer, playwright activist from Trinidad, Laura Lee Jones, senior lecturer at the Edna Manley, Michael Holgate, director of Philip Sherlock Center at the UA, Dr. Phyllis Hill, assistant professor in art education from Mississippi, and they have a presentation, and then from 1 to 2, art and spirituality, really important. All of these are Dr. David Goes, Mrs. Elaine Campbell, etc. So it's another full day from 10 to 2 tomorrow. Please join us and participate in this conference. And you have an opportunity not just to hear, but to engage in conversations via the chat, via direct questions that you might have. And it will be as inspirational and as evocative as it was today. And I think that's my part. I'll leave it to Clinton to say the final word. Again, I want to thank Josh and I want to thank Amina for very insightful, very passionate presentation that gave us a lot to think about, and to also respect and honor what you do and how you do what you have done and what you're imparting to the rest of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Thank you.
And I'll be in touch.
Yes.
Thank you very much. This has been a very rich day. And we hope to do the same for tomorrow and for Saturday, when we tackle Lee Scratch Perry. And we'll have a master panel then, including the person who is known as Mad Professor, one of the biggest dub master in the world, who has been working with Lee Scratch Perry for 40 years. And so we thank you for coming. And let us not just do this conference, but let us take it beyond, because we really need to shape our education system based on our experiences, based on our philosophy, based on what it did for us, and based on the enormous potential to even supersede what we have done globally today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. Wishing you a great day. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Go and check out the work of Josh and Amina and Clinton. And my work. You have to support your artists. That's how we put bread on the table, and give you a spiritual sustenance and help to shape the identity of our society. So thank you all and have a very good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's up.